Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to The Forge.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to The Forge, a Genesys RPG podcast covering everything that you need to know about the latest and greatest from Fantasy Flight Games, Genesys Foundry, and the Genesys role-playing game. I'm your host, GM Hooley, and tonight we're going to do things a little differently with this episode, as we won't have a special guest for the furnace. But don't despair, dear listeners, as it's going to be an amazing topic that will appeal to both game masters running games, players and developers alike. So to do that, I think I'd like to have someone to talk with that about. And so I found this guy hanging outside the studio. GM Chris, how's it going?
What's up?
That's very deep.
Yeah. What is up, Gamer Nation? GM Chris here. And yeah, Hooli, it's going good, man. It's going real good. I'm excitedly pounding the keyboard away at the new product that we're working on for the Foundry.
I know, right?
He says breathing in a very creepy manner, which I don't know where that's coming from.
No, just stop that. But no, we're both very excited about what we're working on. But obviously, we will talk to the listeners about that in later episodes, no doubt, as we progress. Yeah. All right, so should we get this little party started with some news?
I think that's a fantastical idea.
Fantastic. So we call this segment Stoking the Fire.
Stoking the Fire.
And welcome to Stoking the Fire, a segment dedicated to letting you know all there is to know about the releases from the Genesys Foundry and the Genesys role-playing game. But first, Chris, would you like to tell us about the D20 Radio podcast of the week?
Absolutely. And dear listeners, if you love Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and if you don't love Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but you really love a fantastic story, tall tales, epic characters, and just an amazingly funny group of players who really get into their games, then there are some pretty amazing actual play podcasts out there. But none of them match the intensity and the flavor of the story involving a half-drow, a changeling, and their little goblin friend who could. That's right, it's the Eberron Renewed podcast. Join GM Eric along with Philip, Randy, and Jeff as they launch into episode 127, where the party finally gains an audience with the governor of Pylus Talair. But will the powerful elf prove to be an ally? And does she have the information the party needs to find the ancient dragon they seek? You have to listen to find out. I love this show so much. I love Eberron. It's like my second favorite setting of all time.
Right.
And these guys do it phenomenal justice in a really great actual play show.
Absolutely.
So you guys should go take a listen, check it out. And you guys can find that podcast and more amazing gaming and geekery shows over at d20radio.com.
Indeed. So talking about the Foundry, quite a few updates this fortnight.
Yeah,
which is amazing. So there's updates mainly with artwork for Ready Fight, Something Strange, and Inquisition. With even more artwork, as I said, to inspire your adventures in these fantastic settings.
And I want to talk about this, okay? Because this is so keen. What we have here with Ready Fight. By Keith Capel, okay? Something Strange by Scott Zumwalt, and Inquisition by Guillaume Tardif. You've got three products here that they're all silver now. I'm positive, right?
Yep.
Okay. They're some of the best sellers that are on there right now. And what these authors decided to do, Gamer Nation, is they decided to take some of their profit, clearly, reinvest it back into the product that is selling so well, add some additional artwork and make it even prettier, and then just release an update so that everyone who's already purchased it gets a better product now, and now the products that are out there are even more enticing to those looking to buy them.
Yep.
So, Keith, Scott, Bill, well done.
Very much so. Very, very smart. I think that if anybody's looking at doing that, know that we've spoken about it in the past, and I know that I've had numerous conversations online with people about artwork in particular. And look, artwork, it's great, but if you do your layout right, there isn't necessarily as great a need for it. Have some. There's plenty of free stuff out there, or fairly cheap, which is out there, which can make your product, pop. But yeah, reinvest it later on. It's a good plan. And, that's going to encourage more people to buy it. And the people who've already bought it will start talking about how that, they were the first ones to get on board, and they've, they've helped make the product even better than what it currently is. So well done them. Exactly. Yeah, good plan. Now, additions also to the Foundry this fortnight are a couple of ones that I'm quite impressed with. The first one is Blank Adversary Card Bundle by Silverwing Armory. So their blurb basically says, need your adversaries better organized? Then go and get the Ultimate Adversary Card Printable Bundle for your adventures and campaigns. In the bundle, you are provided with cards for all of the adversary types, including an adjusted card for the Nemesis. A great addition to the Foundry, and it's one that originally was being sold on Etsy, and it's after talking to Veronica directly from Silverwing Armory, that she's decided to take the plunge and move it over to Foundry, and literally everybody is talking about it. So for $2.99, cannot go wrong.
No, it's fantastic, and I'm a huge fan of Silverwing Armory. And in addition to the adversary card bundle that she has, also another incredibly popular thing she's produced and has released on the Foundry. For those who are fans of the Magic system in Genesis, she's produced blank spell cards. This is one of those things that we in the Magic system in Genesis, for those that are using it, or however you want to skin it, whether it's superpowers or something else. It's so freeform, and you create things as you go. But one of the tips and tricks that I know, Hooli, you and I have talked about in the past, in various platforms and forms of media, and that experienced GMs really know, is that especially if you have a new player to the system or somebody who's just coming into the Magic core system itself, it is really beneficial to have, for lack of a better term, cheat sheets, okay? Yeah. Which are basically ready-made spells that are written down, ready to go, with the difficulty and all the effects just set. Signature spells. Maybe your character enjoys having an arsenal of spells to draw from just very quickly, and you don't want to go through the analysis paralysis of looking at all the additional effects and building your own spell on the fly. That's what these blank spell cards are designed to do. You can have all that information necessary and within easy reach. Really a great tool for new and experienced players, usable in any Genesis system that uses Magic or a similar reskin. And again, fantastic value at $2.99. And if you guys like this and you want some physical product as well outside of the card she's offering on the Foundry, I also have to highly recommend Veronica's work with her gaming supplies, specifically her campaign notebooks. They're beautifully designed, incredibly cheap, and available for purchase at her website, which is silverwingarmory.com. And that is the British spelling of armory, so ARMOURY.
And the Australian version.
So yeah, go check that out. But very cool stuff. I'm so glad she made that plunge to the Foundry.
Absolutely.
But speaking of plunging, there's a couple other amazing things that came out on the Foundry as well in this past fortnight.
Absolutely. So the first one is a Genesis adventure, which is called Dying Light, which is for the Inquisition setting. Now, in this adventure for the Inquisition setting, the PCs investigate a mystery of a mist-shrouded lighthouse on an island near the village of Darkwood Cove. A strange mist crept over the bay, and beacon itself went dark. Can the PCs cross the mist-filled bay and light the beacon, or will they perish at the hands of a supernatural doom facing the village? This adventure includes 4 pre-generated characters, which seems to be a bit of a go-to thing, and it's a good plan if you want to get people into this particular setting, but you don't want to have them go through the whole of character creation. That there's 4 ready-made, pre-generated characters there. And if you've already got the Inquisition setting, it's basically a must-have, so you can show it off at the table. And it's only $4.99, which is very, very good price.
I know, and Bill Guillaume, he's a talent, man. This is just it's a great read, and you get some wonderful ideas for it. I love it, absolutely love it. The other big thing that came out for me, something entirely new, and beautiful, but from Christopher Ruthenbeck, Zephyr Knights, an Aeromancer supplement for Genesis. I am in love with this concept. Join the noble order of the Zephyr Knights and travel the world, righting wrongs and bringing evildoers to justice. Learn how to ride a flying mount or harness the power of the winds itself and soar unaided. Like, basically, it's this supplement that contains all this great fluff around this exciting new set piece organization called the Order of the Zephyr Knights, and how you can add them into their game, their history, their purpose in the world, but also, of course, is the crunch within this. There is just a host of new talents designed to connect players to the sky, as well as a bunch of aerial-themed adversaries for enemies, pets, allies, and you could even use the Order of Zephyr Knights in your game with the extra talents and adversaries for any fantasy Genesis game. I love this because it's not designed for a very specific setting. It's just fantasy in general. So if you want to get into air and sky-based magic and capabilities, this is an entirely new supplement just for that. I really hope Christopher continues this series because if his work on Zephyr Knights is any indication, it's going to be fantastic. It is only $2.95. You cannot afford to not have this. Any fantasy game you're running, it will add something beautiful. So, absolutely. Well done, Mr. Ruthenbeck.
And if you're looking for more additional content from the Genesys Foundry, you can obviously find that by going to drivethroughrpg.com and searching under Fantasy Flight Games, and they'll have all of those listed there, as well as obviously Fantasy Flight Games titles that are available in PDF as well. All right, so before we get into the main topic of tonight's show, Chris, let's enter a segment we like to call Die Casting.
Die Casting.
All right, so the Forge podcast is all about bringing new creations to the table, and the Genesys RPG provides us all with a powerful set of tools to do so, specifically through skills and talents. The die casting segment is about closely examining individual skills and talents and how they relate to the creations you craft. Now, last episode, we talked about the knowledge skill, and we discussed how you develop that into a list of manageable setting-specific skills for your setting. And so tonight, we're going to return to talents. Are we not?
Well, sort of. So tonight, we're going to take a look at a set of talents of which there are basically there's several in the category. Each of them follows a set of rules, and when designing them, they can be a little bit confusing. Now, I'm talking about grouping talents into standard, improved, and supreme versions of each other.
Yes. So I'm very excited to talk about this because this is a point of confusion, especially for designers. Now, the rules for designing talents in the core rulebook Genesis start on page 194. But beyond that, Huli, the rules are kind of silent when it comes to design choice when exploring improved and supreme versions of talents.
You're right. So I think there needs to be a quick disclaimer before we do anything further. It's entirely possible at some time down the track that Fantasy Flight Games may decide to develop a more codified way of doing this. But in the meantime, using our experience with both Genesis as well as Star Wars, we're going to reverse engineer some of the reasons and the processes of why things are done the way they are when it comes to these three groupings of talents.
All right. So how are we going to tackle this?
Good question. So the first port of call, I think, as per anything that we do, should be really to set the expectations. So firstly, we're going to take a look at what these types of talents they do, how they do them, and why they are worded the way that they are, because there's a very, very specific way that each of these have to be presented. Or they certainly are in the book anyway. So secondly, we're also going to talk about, we're going to look at existing grouping of standard, improved, and supreme talents. And there are a few of them. There's actually only in the whole of the 3 books that have come out so far, there are only 2 of the 3 talents listed. Most of them have just standard and improved, but there's basically only 2. And we're going to take a look at how they work. And then lastly, as a little bit of fun, we're going to design an improved and a supreme talent live on the show for an existing talent from the core rulebook. Sound good?
Yes. Fantastic. Okay. All right, Gamer Nation, let's break down some important rules of thumb when it comes to these sorts of talents before we start talking about the grouped talents.
Yep. And there's basically quite a number of rules of thumb when it comes to this. So the first one is that these talents can only be created when there is a lesser version that exists. So in other words, you can't suddenly say, right, well, there is only going to be an improved version of my talent. There's not an original version. I know that sounds obvious, but basically we're setting down the ground rules. We have to be quite clear as to what we're operating under. So that's the first one. There has to be a lesser version that exists within the rules.
Yes. Now, the second rule of thumb is one that applies to Genesis, but not necessarily to Star Wars, but we'll talk about why it has to apply in Genesis.
Yep.
If you are going to create improved and supreme versions of a talent, the base talent must be always a non-ranked talent. All right. Now, you can argue with us a little bit on that, but let's talk about why. So in Star Wars, this is almost always the case. But there are actually a couple of examples, especially in some recent books, where we've seen improved and supreme versions of a base talent that is a ranked talent. The difference is that in Genesis, the talent structure works very differently.
Very differently.
Very, 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 very differently. And because in Genesis, when you have a ranked talent and you start taking multiple ranks in it, it moves to a different tier. And we have a whole set of rules around the fact that, okay, you have to have so many of this tier before you can take the next tier, and so many of that tier before you can take the tier on top of that. And the bottom line is you put yourself in. So as we'll get to, when we start talking about improved and supreme versions of talents, those are going to exist at tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. So it's dirty pool.
Yep.
when it's like, okay, I'm taking my 4th rank in talent X, which is a tier 4 talent, but I'm also taking the supreme version of talent X, which is also a tier 4 talent. It's a lot of unnecessary confusion, and so it's something you just really want to avoid.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, again, FFG may completely and utterly go against what we've said, but anecdotally, when it comes to what we're seeing in all of the books, these are the things that we've noticed, that they are just always non-ranked. Now, there is an exception to this rule, of course, as there always is, but we'll get on to that in a tick. Now, the other thing as well, there's a few more of them to go. So the talent should improve the functioning of the initial talent. So it should make it either a little bit more potent. It should reduce the cost to activate. Like if it costs an action, it might reduce it down to costing a maneuver. And then the supreme version may, take it down into an incidental. And then, basically there must be some other effect in the same vein that it's doing. So it's it's going along the same sort of theme, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think we'll actually come to that very specific example when we build out our improved and supreme talent later on.
Absolutely.
Now, okay, so rules of thumb so far, obviously you can't create improved supreme groups where a lesser version doesn't exist. The lesser version needs to be a non-ranked talent, and the improved and supreme need to improve the functioning of the initial talent. It goes then also without saying that the improved supreme versions of the group need to be higher tiers than the prerequisite. And depending on depending on the effect that improved has, and depending on the effect that supreme has, we'll talk about what tier it sits in. But yeah, it goes without saying. If your base talent is a tier 1 or a tier 2, then your improved needs to be 3, 4, or 5. Yep. If your improved is a tier 4, the supreme must be a tier 5. Okay, I mean, it's like every level above needs to be at least one tier higher, maybe more, depending on what effect it achieves.
Exactly. Now there is only one exception to that. Yes. Now it hasn't actually been tested out in any of the books that we've seen, but I would imagine that if you've got a talent that, for example, if you've got an improved version that is tier 5, and I know that there is an improved version of a talent which is tier 5, which is overcharge. It's a tier 5. It's the only tier 5 talent sort of grouping that exists in the game so far. But if there was to be a supreme version, it's obviously going to be tier 5 as well, because there is no such thing as tier 6. As much as some people have asked me in the past if there is a tier 6, no. The highest you're going to get to is tier 5. So yeah, it will need to be a tier 5.
God. Can we put that into perspective for a moment? Just getting what it would take to, and we bring this up, getting to a tier 6 talent. Let's good grief. Okay,
it's a lot of XP.
that is an utterly phenomenal amount of XP. Okay, so let's talk about what it takes just to get a tier 5. Okay, a tier 5 itself is 25 XP. Yep. Okay, now to get a tier 5, you got to have 2 tier 4s, so that's 40 XP. Mm-hmm. And to get 2 tier 4s, you got to have 3 tier 3s. Mm-hmm. All right, which is going to be 45 XP. Yep. And to get 3 tier 3s, you got to have 4 tier 2s, which is going to be another 40 XP. And then you got to have 5 tier 1s for another 25 XP. That is 175 XP just to get a tier 5 talent. Yep. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to get a tier 6, you would need to have 2 tier 5s. Okay? That's 350 XP. All right? Plus, if you made it, 30 XP for the tier 6, that's 380 XP. If you think that's reasonable for a character to get to, you are deluding yourself. Okay, so Hooli is correct. If you're gonna if for some ungodly reason you have an improved version at tier 5 and think you need a supreme version, in which case you're improved, why would you need a supreme version of a tier 5 talent? What's going to be better than that? It would have to be tier 5. But if you're honestly writing that, you just need to work on something else. Yep. You're going to have a bad time.
Yeah. There is going to be a certain level of cheese involved. There's no two ways about that. All right. Now, the other thing as well, this has got more to do with the way that it's worded. Each of the talents that we see in all of the 3 books, they all have, your character must have purchased the name of the original talent before they benefit from this talent. This is just something if you're developing your own stuff, it probably doesn't matter all that much. But if you are developing it for use on the Foundry, you're going to have to obey the rules of the land. Now, the interesting thing to point out at this point is that the talent that you list as the prerequisite should be the base talent only. What this means is that technically a character can have a base talent and a supreme version of that talent without needing to purchase the improved version. Now, what does this mean to your design? Is that you need to ensure that the supreme version does not rely on any of the rules from the improved version in order to be effective. And that kind of brings up another question, and that's, is there anything wrong with making the supreme version dependent on having the improved version? The answer is we simply just don't know. With only 2 talent trees, with the standard, improved, and supreme, with only 2 of those existing, we can hardly say that that's a definitive rule. So are there any rules that say that you can't? No, there really isn't. So at this stage, our advice is to treat the improved and supreme versions as of these talents as independent of each other.
Yes. Now, the last rule of thumb, and this is kind of an intriguing one that also comes down to wording, but also a bit of intent, and it's important. So, Huli, you're aware that talents, as they're laid out, are listed as either active or passive, correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
Okay. So that means something very specific. If it's active, it means that your player has to do something. There is an actual action cost, whether that be an action or a maneuver or an incidental, okay? Or incidental out of turn. Okay, the point is your character has to say, I am using this talent. That's what it means. Passive means it's always on, in air quotes, he said. All right? When you're talking about supreme and improved versions of a lower level talent, it means something a little different.
It does, exactly.
Basically, if the improved or supreme version of the talent affects the original talent, it's an upgrade, okay? You can use, inspiring rhetoric as a maneuver now instead of an action, okay? When it affects the original talent, it is passive. Even if the original talent is active, it is passive. It's just modified. It's an always-on ability that modifies the original talent. However, if the improved or supreme versions are, even if they are attached to the original talent or they modify it, if it's something the character can choose to do, they can choose to modify it or not. Or again, if it's unrelated and it's a unique ability, then obviously it's going to apply that way. That is when it's active. So this is another key distinction just to remember with your write-ups that, if even if the base talent is active, if the higher tier groupings in that talent simply do nothing but affect it in an always on capacity, they need to be passive as well.
Absolutely. And it just goes down to a language thing. So ultimately, the rule of thumb here is that if it gives you a choice, it's active. If it doesn't give you a choice, so it does something automatically, it's passive. So yeah, pretty simple there. All right, so that's the basics. Now, in the current rules, which consist of the core rules, Realms of Terranoth, and Shadows of the Beanstalk, there are 11 sets of group talents. 6 are from the core rules, 3 from Realms of Terranoth, and 2 from Shadow of the Beanstalk. And of that multitude of talents, only 2, as I mentioned before, have both improved and supreme versions of themselves. And they are Scathing Tirade and Inspiring Rhetoric. And that's it at this point. So as far as where we go for the supreme versions, we are relying just on those 2 talents.
Yeah. And whether we do that now or later, I would like to actually, because there's so few, let's call out where these groupings are in the core and also in Realms of Terranoth and Shadow of the Beanstalk.
Absolutely.
Do you want to go through them really quickly? I mean, high level?
We can certainly do that. So we have, from the core rulebook, we have Defensive Sysops, which is a tier 1, and then the improved version is tier 2. Great for anyone doing any sort of hacking or, it's something that I know that I've used in as a PC for Shadow of the Beanstalk when I was playing with Huz. Scathing Tirade, as I said, and Inspiring Rhetoric. They've got all 3 versions of that. We've got Parry, which starts as a tier 1 and then it has improved parry with tier 3. Field Commander, which starts at a 3 and goes to a 4. And then Overcharge, which is kind of where I was alluding to before about it starts at tier 4, and then the improved version bumps up to tier 5. I can't imagine what Supreme Overcharge would look like. Is there one in Star Wars? I think there is.
I don't think so at all. Okay. Also, we do need to talk about parry.
Yes.
Parry actually goes against one of our rules, our rules of thumb we laid out.
It does, yeah, because it's a ranked talent.
Yeah, and this is one of those things when we say, typically speaking, you never want to do this, but you can see it on occasion. You can see it in Star Wars, and you can see it in parry. However, I would like to talk about a key thing here. When we look at what they've done, parry is a tier 1. All right. And it is ranked. Okay. Improved parry is a tier 3. So with only 2 other exceptions, it is the only time you will see a jump of more than one talent tier between levels.
Absolutely.
All right. And that is parry in and of itself. Okay. And parry, it's one of those unique talents. It's the exception that proves the rule. Yep. It is a ranked talent on the in terms of the base talent, but that's because the benefit of the talent itself is determined by how many ranks you have in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you kind of need that to be ranked. And it's also, again, it's one of those holdovers from Star Wars.
Look, the other thing to remember about parry as well is that it's not something that improves on parry itself. It actually goes by theme. So there's a little bit different there. So, if you are creating your own talents, and, you have a tier 1 that's ranked, then, if you aren't sort of adding to that, the abilities that first talent tier gives you, that, you might be saying, well, it might be okay to then go and do that as they've done with parry. So, yeah, interesting comparison there. So, that's the ones from the core rulebook. What about Terranoth?
So in Terranoth, we have Templar, which is tier 1 for the basic, and then we have Improved Templar, which is tier 2. We have Shapeshifter. Again, basic is tier 1, improved is tier 2. Then we come to one of the other unusuals, which is Signature Spell. The basic signature spell talent which basically you define a spell and you can reduce the difficulty by 1 when you cast it. It's non-ranked, but the improved and it's tier 2. The improved version actually jumps up 2 tiers. So the improved version is tier 4. And again, this kind of gives you an ability because the improved version is not small. It allows you to reduce the difficulty of that spell by 2. Okay. And when you come to especially attack spells and magic, that is a radical improvement.
Absolutely.
Okay. That is an absolutely radical improvement. So it's worthy of a tier 4, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely.
So it's
huge. And then we've got Shadow of the Beanstalk, where we have Undercity Contacts, which is it starts at a tier 2 and then goes up to a tier 3 with the improved version. And then my all-time favorite, which is Parkour, with the exclamation mark. So Parkour! See, I don't think they should have called it improved. I think they should have called it Parkour and Hardcore Parkour. Instead. So it jumps up from a 2 to a 4. Again, there's a big jump there, but there is a reason, because parkour is a fantastic talent by itself, but then the improved version does some crazy things too. So, definitely. I can see why that there's a jump of 2 levels from one to the other.
Yeah, I can too, and it's also noticeable. It's more than just the cost too. The XP cost for the talent increase. The difference for parkour versus improved parkour, the strain cost is radical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because parkour is like 1 strain to move to any location within short range. And again, as a maneuver, improved parkour 4 strain. But you can move to any location in medium range. Yeah. That is insane. So, I mean, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Hello there.
Look, just something I want to touch base on there very, very quickly, because a lot of people have sort of, they message us here and there, and they ask us about, doing conversions for Star Wars and whatever else because there are some improvements. Obviously, as we've talked about in the past, there's, 5 years of playtesting with Star Wars before they did Genesis. But if you wanted to replicate something like Enhance, or whichever power it is, that you jump from 1 point to the next, or jump up to medium range, you could use that talent to replicate that precisely. Just saying.
Just saying. There you go. And this also gets into the tiers discussion, and maybe this will, how do you tier out where a talent goes? When you get into its benefit, and there's a lot of eyeballing involved.
Yeah.
But the best way is to compare to other talents, okay? And what you'll see consistently is when you have a talent that allows you to accomplish one thing that typically takes an action or two maneuvers in this case of parkour and improved parkour in a reduced span of time. So now you're doing it as a maneuver, for example. That is almost always tier 4 territory or higher. And you see that case here.
Absolutely.
Because that's really what improved parkour does. It lets you get two maneuvers in one maneuver. And yeah, it costs you a bunch of strain, but that's still incredibly badass. So yeah. Well, okay, let's bring this discussion then into examining one of these talent sets specifically.
Yeah.
And which one are we going to break down and really dive into and talk about the mechanics behind it and how it's scaled out and tiered out in terms of its talents? Which of these cores are we going to bring?
Okay, so we've really only got the two, as I've mentioned before. So one of my favorites is Inspiring Rhetoric. So, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. And look, let's take a look at the base version. Now, the base version says that your character may use this talent to make an average leadership check. For each success the check generates, one ally within short range heals 1 strain. For each advantage, one ally benefiting from Inspiring Rhetoric heals 1 additional strain. Very cool. I love that so much. It's great for your face character who isn't necessarily going to be involved in combat, but wants to really beef up his fellow PCs.
Yes. And it's a fun talent, but let's be honest, even from the days of Star Wars, it was always a stepping stone.
Yes. Indeed.
All right. And this brings up a good point when it comes to group talent designs. Let's say you have a great talent, but when you cost it out, it belongs at tier 3. It belongs at tier 2. All right. But you want to do an improved, and supreme version. Don't think of it like, okay, don't necessarily think of it as I need to create an improved and supreme version of this awesome talent I've got. Say to yourself, well, my God, maybe this talent I've just created is the improved version.
Yes.
Maybe it is the supreme version, and now I'm working backwards. Okay. And how can I downgrade this to provide something similar? That's a whole nother avenue of thought design as well. And that leads us to improved inspiring rhetoric, which even since the days of Star Wars was always the go-to, what people really wanted to get to, okay? Because it's the buff talent, okay? 1 tier up, tier 3, passive activation because it modifies the inspiring rhetoric tier 2 talent, okay? And again, we have that wonderful boilerplate that they have at the front. Your character must have purchased inspiring rhetoric to benefit from this talent, which is basically allies affected by your character's inspiring rhetoric add a boost die to all skill checks they make for a number of rounds equal to your character's rank in leadership. It's a fantastic talent. It's a staple talent for face characters, and typically one of the first ones they pick up so they can have major efficacy in combat. Because I healed you a strain. Okay, thanks for that. That's really great. But how about that boost die? Where them boost die at? That's what your players are going to be saying to you.
Absolutely.
So, now, do you feel this is tier 3 worthy? Should it be lower? Should it be higher?
Look, I'm thinking tier 3 is exactly where it's supposed to be.
I know, but it's 50 XP to get to this.
Yeah, that is true.
All right,
that is true.
All right, it's 50 XP to get here, and I've heard a lot of complaints about inspiring rhetoric being tier 3. Some people think it's overcosting. I would argue that I think it's correctly costed, and I think you are incorrectly comparing it to Star Wars, where for many specializations, I think it was undercosted. Yep. Okay. The ability to throw someone an automatic boost die for, let's be realistic, 2 to 3 rounds, because that's what your leadership is going to be at by the time you get this talent, is staggeringly good. Okay. it's superb. In addition to the strain healing, done.
And then we've got the Supreme version, which they've increased it to a tier 4. Again, it's this one's a little bit different, and so it's active because it's doing something a little bit. It's doing something differently, but you choose to do something. So your character may choose to suffer 1 strain to use Inspiring Rhetoric talent as a maneuver instead of as an action.
And we talked about this before. When you're reducing the action economy, that's tier 4, tier 5 territory.
Yep, that's right. So if you've got, to just sort of summarize, we've got the improved version where it's adding something extra, so it's a passive. You've then got the Supreme version, which is then giving you something extra that you can do. There's a cost involved, but you have a choice whether you want to turn it into a maneuver as opposed to an action. So
exactly,
that's probably the main reason why I chose Inspiring Rhetoric, because it does obey the rules quite succinctly.
And it's a great example set of group talents to look at for how you can see the different rules of thumb in action. And really, it's a good barometer of design.
Yep.
It really is.
Exactly.
It really is.
Exactly.
And honestly, I think we're going to use that barometer pretty heavily as we finish out this conversation and design some talents of our own.
Indeed. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to choose one talent that exists already in the book, in the core rulebook specifically, and we've decided to choose Swift. Now, Swift itself, it basically says your character does not suffer the penalties for moving through difficult terrain. They move through difficult terrain at normal speed without spending additional maneuvers. Quite simple, something which it doesn't come up a lot, but when it does, and you don't have the talent, you wish you'd spent the 5 XP to do so.
Yeah. And, it is a tier 1. And for those looking for it in the core rulebook, it is on page 75. Swift is kind of it's not taking a whole lot. Now, one of the other subtle benefits of creating an improved and supreme version of a talent is that it can encourage the taking of the base talent, whereas you otherwise might not have. Yep. To put it another way, as we're looking at Inspiring Rhetoric just a couple minutes ago, as we said, the base talent of Inspiring Rhetoric has always been kind of a stepping stone to get to improved. If improved didn't exist, Hooli, it is highly plausible, if not probable, that most face characters would probably skip it.
Yes.
Because it's fun, but I healed you a strain. Oh, wait, no, 2 strain. Thanks. It's like I rolled 2 advantage on my last combat check and healed myself 2 strain, but thanks.
Yeah.
So that's a great example, but you're going to take it because you want the improved and supreme. Yep. So I think as we're talking about building out an improved and supreme version of Swift, I think we should keep that same tact in mind. I want improved and supreme to provide some really good benefits, or at least moderately more beneficial.
Yep.
But I think they should definitely. Should we focus on improving Swift, like modifying Swift, or should we go for something unique that just kind of keeps it in the same vein of, fast and, Zephyrus-like movement?
Well, look, when you look at Swift as a talent, it really there aren't any additional rules when it comes to difficult terrain. Difficult terrain it costs you double the amount of maneuvers to move through anything. So if you can remove that, what else is there? So I think really it's really calling to adding something there which is more in theme rather than attacking further parts to the rules. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And so with that, I'm thinking about character. Here's another thing, and we don't have to do this for Supreme, but for Swift, what it really does is it deals with a nasty, not necessarily nasty, but an annoying condition that the player has to deal with. It's an environmental condition, right? And that condition is difficult terrain. Dang it, that sucks. But now I don't have to worry about it anymore. I think for improved, maybe we could find a similar or related condition or environmental effect that can impact a character that they can somehow ignore or get out of.
We do have the immobilized condition as well.
We do have the immobilized condition, and the immobilized condition can happen through magic. It can happen through a lot of weapon effects. Sometimes immobilization sucks because sometimes it can be broken free, and that's like if it happens from a weapon, that's actually in the weapon description. It's like, make a hard athletics check or a coordination check to break out of the net or whatever it is. Sometimes though, immobilization just says, yo, you're immobilized. You don't get to take maneuvers for X number of rounds. Right. And that's it. And even then, if you do have the ability to break free, it's like an action on your turn that you have to do it. It's a real pain in the butt. I like that. I like yes. I like this condition. Let's find a way to nerf that condition through the improved version of Swift.
Right. Well, just using what you were just talking about there, that there are rules that already exist that you can make a hard coordination or an athletics check to get out of some of those weaponry descriptions.
Yes.
So why can't we use that? We could bring that into the talent so that it allows a character to always be able to do that. But I think that there probably should be some sort of expenditure, whether that be like a story point, or whether it be through strain or something like that.
I like a story point. I think it's a fantastic thing we often see in some of some mid to high tier talents. So what you're saying is that they can spend a story point to attempt a hard coordination and athletics check to break out of the immobilization effect. Yep. I mean, even if it wouldn't normally allow it. That's cool and all, but I don't know, man. I might price that as tier 2 because it's not that great of a benefit. I'm still having to waste an action on my turn, and quite frankly, some immobilization effects already allow me to make that check, depending on the weapon used. I mean, is there any way we could beef it up even further?
Well, look, one of the things that we haven't really talked about is what's the action economy when it comes to this. So, it's not rather than sort of as an action or a maneuver, why don't we consider putting it down as perhaps as an out of turn incidental, maybe?
That is brilliant. Okay, so let's recap this. Improve Swift. When your character is immobilized, you can spend a story point as an out of turn incidental to attempt your hard coordination or athletics check. And if you're successful, you immediately break free from the immobilization effect. Wow. Now, Hooli, I'm totally down for this. How are we going to tier it? Oh, no, we had said earlier that, what we've just done is we've just dealt with action economy, right? We've turned what's normally an action into an out-of-turn incidental. That's typically tier 4, tier 5 talent territory. Do we want to go that high with improved of this?
Look, I think that maybe that it's, I'm thinking maybe tier 3 or 4. It's pretty potent, to be perfectly honest. But
so I'm gonna push back. I think tier 3 is where it should sit, and let me tell you why. And maybe we can argue it out. It's potent when it comes into play.
True.
How often do you immobilize characters, Hooli?
Not all that often, and I should do it more often because it's amazing.
Yeah. So when you consider that, so normally I would always price out an action economy benefit, which this clearly gives, at tier 4 better. But considering that it's going to be infrequently used or less frequently used, I'd probably bring it down to a tier 3.
Yeah, true. And again, as we've sort of said in the past, this is all going to be dependent on your setting. If you've got the PCs are all on the run, let's call it Logan's Run, for those from the 80s, or whatever it was.
Box.
So if you've got people that are always on the run that are being chased after by people, by the enemy, whoever, robots, whatever. If this sort of talent is something that you're going to have a lot more of, you may want to consider it for your setting to actually be a higher tier. So, if we were doing it on the law of averages, I think you're 100% right. Tier 3 is highly appropriate. But if you were dealing with it more often than not, increase the tier. But yeah, happy with tier 3.
Renew. So sorry, I'm still in Logan's Run.
I'm showing my age.
I'm totally down with that. Now, interestingly though, you got me thinking about the Supreme version now, because your example with Logan's Run is a really good one.
Yep.
And I'm thinking about people that are always on the run.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, if we're going to create a Supreme version of this talent, we had one where you're spending a story point and you can break free of a mobilization, out of turn, incidental, hard coordination or athletics check. I think it's good. I think it's well priced. Yep. When it comes to Supreme, we need something better than that. Okay. So we just made an action economy modifying talent that is tier 3 related to swiftly moving. Okay. But it's situational.
Yep.
For Supreme, should we keep the theme going? We can keep it, in that swifty movement theme, maybe even related to action economy as well. But I mean, really hell for leather on this. I mean, something really powerful, really supreme.
Look, I think we should. And my first thought comes to, everybody's always looking for a way. And I was asked this week, how can you improve the speed of your character? So that it's, there isn't really anything that's out there that breaks that whole, the most you can move is 2 maneuvers using a move maneuver. So I want to break that. Now, obviously, to break that, that's a big thing to break. But I'm thinking that, we're probably looking at a higher tier for, without going into the nitty gritty at the moment, but that's where I'd be looking, because that is something that is, I don't think it's been done before, but it certainly sticks with the theme of being able to move quickly and away from danger.
Yeah, I completely agree. And honestly, when you consider how powerful that can be, I think it should cost a story point.
Yep, I agree. You may even consider making it a once per session ability as well, and spend a story point. Yeah, absolutely. Because that's something that breaks the rules effectively. However, if we were decide to make it a tier 5 talent, tier 5 talent, as we've explained earlier in the show, that's 175 XP. So that's a lot of XP to sink into something, and it should be cool. A tier 5 talent should be, something that you see at the end of a big movie that the hero suddenly pulls out of their pocket. That's something. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself.
If it was insanely powerful, like get an extra action, okay. If it was insanely powerful like that, I would say, look, once an encounter or once a session, I would say probably once a session, and you got to spend a story point. This isn't insanely powerful. It breaks the action economy. So when you have that, it's like, okay, it's not uber, but it's really powerful. I typically find another good rule of thumb is okay, what's the cost going to be? Either 1, a crap ton of strain, okay, and I'm talking more than 4, okay. 2, a story point, or 3, give it a once a session. All right. If you start adding all those in some fashion, it needs to be like stupid powerful. Yep. Okay.
Great.
Which I don't think this is. Okay. So let's recap this so far. So the character can spend a story point as an incidental. All right. To gain an immediate additional maneuver on their turn. This maneuver must be used to perform a move maneuver and can be taken even if your character has already performed 2 maneuvers this turn.
Yep. And also that it has to be once per session. Just to give it that limited, because as we've said, it's pretty powerful.
That's pretty powerful. Okay, so what are we gonna? Do we even need to talk about tiering?
No.
So this is tier 5.
It's tier 5. There is no two ways about that.
All right. There's no two ways. All right, and I kind of like that because Swift is tier 1, Improved Swift is tier 3, Supreme Swift is tier 5. Okay. So what have we built here, Gamer Nation? We've built a couple talents using kind of our rules of thumb that really enhance the theme of, quite frankly, a rather underutilized talent that nobody really seems to care about that much, which is Swift, and made it a stepping stone to a couple really interesting abilities that continue to carry that Swift movement, freedom, speed theme forward in some intriguing ways. So we have Improved Swift, tier 3. When your character is immobilized, you can spend a story point as an out-of-turn incidental to attempt a hard coordination or athletics check, and if successful, your character breaks free from the immobilization effect. And then we have the Tier 5 Supreme Swift. Once per session, your character may spend a story point as an incidental to gain an immediate additional maneuver on their turn. This maneuver must be used to perform a move maneuver and can be taken even if your character has already performed 2 maneuvers this turn.
Now,
and the one thing we forgot was the preambles for both.
That is true.
So, yeah, for Improved Swift, must have Swift to take this talent. Yeah. For Supreme Swift, must have Improved Swift to take this talent. But yeah,
absolutely.
There we go.
Yeah, and there you go. Now, one thing that I'd just like to throw a disclaimer on. Obviously, that is done off the top of our heads. We did think about Swift before the show, but when it comes to the actual running of how these talents are worded, we've done it on the fly. So there is probably going to be, and as we've said in the last episode, playtest. So there are going to be some things, and the first thing that comes off of my head is how would it work with parkour? But anyway, so by all means, Gamer Nation, if you are listening to this part of the podcast and you've really you like what we've done, please playtest them. Let us know how they go. Ask us any questions so that maybe we can nut this out and make it as a bit of a group exercise for the listeners as well as us as well.
Yes. And I know exactly how it would work with parkour or improved parkour, by the way.
Okay, go ahead. Or would you like to leave that for discussion?
It can't. You know why?
Why?
Nope. It can. I thought improved parkour required a story point, but it doesn't.
Right.
Because you only spend 1 story point on it.
Yeah.
You only spend 1 story point on a turn.
Very good.
But no, honestly, dude, improved parkour is a tier 4 talent.
Yeah.
So what? It works beautifully.
Yep.
You want to pop 4 strain to go anywhere in medium range as a maneuver, and you want to use that as your 3rd maneuver. So, I mean, basically, you could move 4 range. You could move to medium range on your turn, then use Supreme Swift and Improved Parkour to move to another point in medium range. Yeah, I would totally let you do that. It costs you 4 strain, a story point, and a tier 4 and a tier 5 talent. Yeah, I would totally let you do that.
I'm thinking the Flash has got all of these as far as talents go. So yeah, but very good. But yeah, look, if you've got any talents or skills or any rules discussions that you would like us to talk about on the show in this particular segment, let us know. Send us an email or get in contact with us in any of our social media platforms. So, should we get into the next segment of the show, Chris?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, if the Flash is heating things up by running around, with improved parkour and Supreme Swift, I think we need to heat things up here on the show by really pumping those bellows and getting into the furnace.
Nice segue.
I'm the king of segues, man.
The Furnace.
And welcome to The Furnace, the segment where we take a deep dive into a topic concerning custom creations using the Genesys role-playing game. And when it comes to creating your own setting or world in Genesys, or even expanding upon an existing setting, one of the very first things that often comes to mind for GMs, and certainly for players, is archetypes and species.
That's right. Whether it's a specialized humans, archetypes who embody classic tropes, or genuine species of diverse appearance and ability who populate your fantasy and sci-fi settings, the archetypes and species available for players to select go a long way towards really imparting that tone and feeling of your game. People love to create species, man. They just love it.
I know, right?
I mean, look, if you look at the fan generated content, I mean, truly fan generated content that gets posted online, like 90% of it is species, right? I mean, it always has been. People love it, and perhaps more than anything else, you will usually find also players coming to the GM screen, hat in hand, with an archetype or a species concept that they have created on their own, asking you to use it.
Yep, right. It happens all the time. And therein lies the concern, though, because a player's choice of archetype or species sets the most fundamental foundation of character creation. Granting them their base abilities, their physical and mental traits that will stay with them effectively for the entire campaign. Now, the archetypes available in the published FFG materials are going to be ones that you safely know are balanced, well play-tested and ready to use. Except if you're talking about humans, which have varied from the core rulebook to Shadow of the Beanstalk. But there was reasons for that. But what about your own custom-created archetypes? How can you create them in a viable way, ensuring that they provide the concept that you're looking to impart while still being balanced during play?
Well, that's what we are going to begin diving into tonight, Gamer Nation. This episode will be the first part in an ongoing series, not recurring, but we'll come back to it on occasion, where we dive into species and archetype creation. Tonight's furnace is going to be a bit longer, however, than those other 5 segments that we'll come to. Because we're actually, as we really need to, we're going to start off our discussion with really just some review and discussion on the core rules of archetype and species creation, because they matter for what we're going to be talking about in those that 6-part series. Yep. Okay. But then we are going to get really specific after that. And tonight we are going to focus in on developing species and archetypes of the beefy variety. Basically, concepts that focus on brawn as a defining characteristic. And this is going to include the best practices to develop species and archetype abilities and unique abilities for that concept. So that's what we're talking about tonight, man. Let's get into this.
So, as Chris said, we basically have to set the expectations, as we always like to do. It's our main rule of thumb, is set the expectations before we go. So, let's talk about terminology first.
Yes.
The difference between an archetype and a species. So look to page 192 of the core rulebook.
Yes.
When we're talking about an archetype and a species, realistically, when it comes to the rules, there isn't a big difference.
No.
But when it comes to your setting, it might. If you've got an archetype where, we'll use the core rulebook, for example, that we have, the labourer, we've got the standard human, we've got the aristocrat. They're all humans, or are they? We just don't know. And that's sort of your archetype. So that's where that type of person is going to fit in. But then we've got Realms of Terranoth, where we're actually talking about specific species that follow exactly the same rules. But essentially, there is zero difference between the two. During this whole process, we're going to be using the term species in the show to cover both. As the advice we'll be giving, and the rules, as I said, they cover both during the creation thereof. Yeah,
just know that when we're talking about this, because it's easier, we're just going to say species, but this is, whether it's archetypes or species, they're the same thing. Yep. So
exactly.
There we go.
Cool.
So let's dive into the core rules for creating a species here. Let's review what's laid out in the book and just talk at a very high level about archetype creation. And it really starts with the basic species profile. When you are making something fresh from whole cloth, the book, and these species creation rules are starting on page 192 of the Genesys core rulebook. They're very crisp and clean, page 192 and 193, just 2 pages. But they basically say, look, there is a basic species profile you need to start with. And there are 6 steps or parts to it that's sort of this starting template for custom species. So let's talk about part one. What is the first thing that you need to consider, and obviously matters to us for the discussion we're going to have in just a few minutes.
So the first part is obviously to starting with your characteristics. And that will normally be that 4 of them are going to be at 2, 1 of them will be at 3, and then 1 of them will be at 1. And that's more of a balancing exercise. Now, like the standard human, you can operate with 2s across the board. There's nothing wrong with that. It makes it for a very much a generalized species that you're going to be playing with. But the reason why they're suggesting that you have 1 at 3 and then 1 at 1 is that your species should have some sort of theme to it, whether it be that it's a minotaur, so that it's going to be, huge and bulking, or whether it's going to be more of an intellectual species, in which case your intellect might be the highest stat.
Yes.
But that's what you're going to be really focusing on, is what imagery are you invoking for that particular character or for that particular species.
Yeah. And it's important to note also that because you brought up the point, Hooli, when we talk about having a 3, 4 2s, and a 1 for characteristics, that's the layout, as we'll come to, for 100 starting XP.
That's right.
When we're not, and as we're going to get to this, guys, that you don't have to limit yourself to a 3, 4 2s, and a 1. You can change it, but it's going to change the starting XP like it does for humans, okay? Who have all 2s across the board, but we'll come to that.
Exactly.
Now, your next key feature for the starting template, there's 2 of them. We can talk about them both together. Is wound threshold and strain threshold. Right. Okay, so obviously the species provides a base threshold for both wounds and strain, and it can vary wildly species to species. And we'll talk about how it could be modified. But the standard template is wound threshold is 10 plus brawn, strain threshold is 10 plus willpower.
Exactly.
Period. End of sentence.
Now, there can be something as far as something said for when you're starting to, take these up or down, depending on what sort of theme that you're looking at. Because obviously, as you're taking points away, you're adding points that you can spend to develop new skills, new abilities, adding additional characteristics if you wanted to go down that way. And one of the biggest questions that comes up is, why isn't it just a 1-for-1 on both cases? Quite simply is that it's harder to get wounds, like get them back during gameplay, than it is strain. So
basically, yeah.
So that's the reason why that strain is a little bit more expensive than wounds are.
And we'll talk about what that XP economy is. But yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought it up because we're going to reference it again.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so we've got the wound and the strain threshold. Now, something to also consider as well is the starting characteristics that you have are going to really, and it may not come out in the points, but it will certainly come out in playtesting. That if you've got a species with a high brawn, and you've also given them a high wound threshold, it's going to increase it exponentially.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be really mindful of that when you do your balance.
Yes.
Because suddenly you'd be going, right, well, I'm going to have 12 wound threshold and 4 brawn. Suddenly you're ending up with a 17 wound character straight off the bat. But that's a distinct problem, and that will obviously make that character potentially way more overpowered as well. Yeah,
I absolutely agree, and it's something that is very, very important to come to when we talk about, especially how you can allocate your XP and what you have to think of. But when it comes to the basic species profile, there's always you start always with starting XP of 100.
Yep.
Just period. When you have the 10 plus brawn, 10 plus willpower, 1 3 4 2s and a 1 in characteristics, that equals 100 XP. It also 100 XP equals the next thing, which is a very specific special ability, and then potentially another unique rule.
Yep.
But they specifically call this out, that a good species or archetype will have a special ability. And in terms of this starting template, what is that special ability?
So the special ability will just be one rank in one skill.
Yep.
Now, I'm just going to sort of harken back to Star Wars here very quickly, is that you can see that there's a lot of species in Star Wars that have a talent, for example. In this game, you can't do that. And the reason is that you're basically giving them a way big jumpstart, because how do they track that one talent on their talent pyramid? It's not possible.
Exactly.
So you can't do it like Star Wars, where it provides talents, where it's not as big a deal. But certainly in this system, you provide one rank to one skill.
Yeah, additionally, if you look at the talents that in Star Wars, when you have a species that gets a free talent, it is always a ranked talent. So basically, as you're moving through a talent tree, like you would in Star Wars, you're never skipping anything. Even if you have that talent as a first talent you need to take in your talent tree, that you don't get to skip it. You just guess what? You spend your 5 XP and now you have 2 ranks. Okay, that's what it is. But as you point out, Hooli, we have a talent pyramid in Genesis. Yep. It doesn't work that way. So you're giving somebody a massive head start. So don't do that. The special ability for a basic species profile, the starting template, is 1 rank and 1 skill. Now, what skill is it? We will come to that in a moment, and how that matters for XP modification.
Absolutely.
And lastly, Hooli, we have the fun one.
Yeah.
Other unique rules. Basically, most but not all species have some kind of special rule that cannot be obtained in any other way in the game. There's no way they could ever spend XP to get this capability. It is something, they can breathe underwater. What are the android archetype in Shadow of the Beanstalk?
My favorite one is the Looney, in that they can basically start changing dice facings, and things like that. That is just insane.
It's great. There's never a talent you can get that will let you do that.
Not at all.
Oh gosh, in the core rulebook, there's the Bioroid, and this is the one that's also it's reprinted in Shadow of the Beanstalk, and their unique ability is inorganic. They're basically the equivalent of droids, right? So I mean that is a set of unique rules that you're never going to get through talent or skill or XP expenditure ever.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, one of my favorite ones is the one which is from the Psionic, which is from the Twilight Imperium. And that gives you, 3 different powers that you can use as a Psionic, but they're massively expensive when it comes to your starting XP, but we'll get on to that later on down the track. But so effectively, and this is one of the reasons why people love to do species, I think, is because they can bring in that flavor in these special abilities, unlike anything else, because the rest of it is really just a numbers crunching exercise. This is more your creative flavor, and it's something that you really don't get when it comes to careers, as opposed to what Star Wars has done, where it's just a list of skills that you would have for a career. So it's very thematic, but there's not a lot of creation to it. Certainly when it comes to a species, your special abilities really set the tone for what you're going for. Yeah. Or the unique rules. Yeah. And I completely agree. But okay, you talked about it. So let's dig into this. Okay. We've gone through the basic species profile, that starting template for a custom species. And again, to recap for everybody, characteristics, you got a 3, 4 2s, and a 1. Wound and strain thresholds are 10 plus. Okay, 10 plus brawn, 10 plus willpower, 100 starting XP, 1 rank and 1 free rank and 1 skill, and then other unique rules. What if, before we get into other unique rules, because that's a discussion in its own right, let's talk about the first sets. What if I don't like that? What if I want a 4 in a characteristic, or no 1s, or 3 1s? What if I want different thresholds? What do I do? you're wanting to modify the basic profile.
That's exactly.
And so the way that you realistically, you have to start somewhere. So there are XP costs for things, and how that goes through. So whether that be character a change cost, wound and strain threshold costs, special abilities cost, and things like that. And even sort of single rank, like if you don't want to have the one rank in a skill, why you wouldn't want to do that, I'm not quite sure. But if you wanted to get rid of that, what would that be worth?
Yeah.
And there's obviously some rules that apply to that.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you can start changing all this stuff, but it's going to either cost you or give you XP.
That's right.
Which applies to the starting XP for your species.
Exactly. And there is a strict set of rules. Well, I say strict because, they've codified it.
Sort of strict.
But, when it comes to playtesting, everything is malleable. So when it comes to your characteristic costs for a start, let's look at that.
Easy.
So the process works exactly the same as character generation does. That if you have a 3 and you want to take it up to a 4, it's going to cost you 40 XP. The only difference is that obviously if there's the reverse that you're doing and that you've got a 2 and you want to take it down to a 1, well, that's going to be 20 XP. And the reason is that obviously if you had a 1 and you went up to a 2, you'd be, it'd be costing you 20 XP. Well, you're just putting this in the reverse. So the same sort of thing applies. Character generation is exactly the same as when you're designing your initial species. As far as the attributes go, anyway.
And this is why you'll notice, Gamer Nation, that humans have 110 XP. Because instead of a 3, 4 2s, and a 1 for their characteristics, they've got 2s across the board. Okay? So raising that 1 to a 2 cost them 20 XP. But lowering the 3 to a 2 earned them 30. Okay? So the net difference is 10. That gets added to the XP pool. That's why they have 110 XP.
There you go.
Okay, that's the cost for a characteristic change. We all get that. It's the same as character creation, right? One of the things you cannot do in character creation is change your wound and strain thresholds, not without taking some talents, of course.
Absolutely.
But here, when you're creating a custom species, you can actually, you know what? I don't like 10 plus brawn. I don't like 10 plus willpower. I want it to be, I want them to have a high strain threshold. I want it to be, 2 or 3 points higher than normal. Or I want their wounds to be, I want their wound threshold to be 2 or 3 points higher than normal. Or, they're weak, either weak bodied or weak willed. I want them to have lower,
Yep.
What is the XP cost associated with increasing or decreasing strain and wounds on the threshold side?
So with wounds, as I sort of alluded to before as well, is that wounds are, they're harder to come by than strain is. So in this case, to increase 2 wounds, it's 5 XP. To increase strain by 1, it's the same XP. And the reason is that it's easier to get strain back. So obviously the amount of cost must be greater. So 2 wounds, 5 XP, 1 strain, 5 XP.
So great. So this is a 1-for-1 mathematical model. If I wanted to do 4 wounds, that would be 10 XP, right?
No. There are reasons for that. So 4 wounds basically would be 15 XP, and 2 strain would also be 15 XP. So it goes up exponentially.
Yeah.
And again, because this is something which will make or break your character, in comparison to everybody else, is that there has to be a limiting factor. Otherwise, you'd have people that would be designing species with, no starting XP and, 28 wounds or something like that. That would just break the game, and that would be silly.
Yeah.
So 2 wounds are going to be 5 XP. 4 wounds are going to be 15 XP. sometimes you can do 1 wound for 0 XP. Sometimes, I mean, this is going to be very fluid. This is probably the most fluid. But most species don't really have any more than 2 wounds up or more than 2 strain up. So, and that's the reason why that they've stipulated that. But, if you just wanted to go up by 1 wound, there might be no XP cost. Just play around with it is what our suggestion is.
And that's specifically called out in the book because sometimes it's like, you know what, I want them to be like for wounds specifically, I want them to be a little burlier.
Yeah.
I want them to be a little burlier, but not huge. You could make it 11 plus brawn and probably get away with not increasing the XP, probably. Or consequently, you could say, you know what, I want them to be a little weaker. If you were to lower it to like 9 plus brawn, that really is probably not going to give you any XP. No. It's not that big of a thing. Yep. But if you said, I want it to be 8 plus brawn, okay, well, guess what? You've now your starting XP is 105. Yep. Okay, you've earned that back. Okay, it's not a 1-for-1 mathematical model, and it's just very, very important to note.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's how we handle characteristics. That's how we handle wound and strain thresholds. Let's talk about special abilities because there's actually some very interesting rules in this. So it says 1 rank in 1 skill.
Yep.
Right. So my God, is that any skill I want?
Well, basically, it's going to be dependent on one thing, and that's going to be how intrinsically linked into your species that skill is going to be. So if you've got someone who's, we'll use the brawn character. If you've got somebody who has a high brawn and suddenly they're going to have brawl, it's going to be worth more than if you'd suddenly given them an intellect-based skill. So
exactly.
There has to be a difference there.
If the skill synergizes really well with your species starting characteristics, it should be worth 10, not 5. Now, what does that mean? It means that when the core template says, look, you get 1 rank and 1 skill, that's assuming it's a 5 XP skill, meaning it's a skill that doesn't synergize exceptionally well. Okay? That's, and it doesn't have to be intellect, but it just, like if you're making a high brawn species, it shouldn't be a brawn skill. No, okay?
That's right.
And there's other wise choices you can make, continuing the brawn example, and we're probably getting ahead of ourselves here talking about brawn, but that's okay. A very common one I see are cunning-based skills or willpower-based skills, okay? Because that's not diametrically opposed to a brawly character. It doesn't make sense for a brawly, burly character to have a free rank and an intellect-based skill, not typically. There are some occasions where it might, but not typically. But something like survival, okay, or perception, or discipline, or vigilance, is totally reasonable thematically, but it's still, that's going to be a free skill rank, and that's 5 XP territory. If you tell me it's going to be brawl or athletics, okay, then that's worth 10 XP. That means ultimately it's going to reduce that starting XP down to, and now it's not 100 anymore, it's now 95, right?
Look, another thing to take into consideration there as well is that when you're looking at the sort of setting that you're in, that if you've got a skill that is going to be used fairly often, for example, if you decided to go and create a water world setting where athletics and, obviously you may even have a swimming skill, I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you were having a skill that is used all the time for that particular setting, you would probably increase the cost for that because you're giving them a one-up really quickly, like a step up really quickly to a skill that's being used all the time. It's the reason why that in many species you don't have many that have a combat skill as their starting ability.
It's very rare, because it's used so frequently.
That's right.
And by that same note, a lot of you might get a bright idea in your head that, I'll get a free rank and a combat skill. No, it's a bad idea. That also goes for magic.
Yes.
All right. I've seen some homebrews where it's like, yes, I've made Dragonkin, or and yes, they get a free rank in Arcana. No, bad idea. All right. Yep. Very bad idea.
I mean, you could, but you would need to basically do some sort of mathematics behind that and see how powerful it actually really is. So you might be going, yeah, sure, you can have that, but it's going to be 20 XP as opposed to 10 or something like that. But we would not recommend it.
Yeah, that's totally viable too. Yeah. So that's where it comes in. And okay, now I'm really getting ahead of myself, but I have to say this before I forget because I will forget, and it's not in our show notes. So I'm going to call an audible on this. If you want to do a character that has inborn arcane abilities, don't represent that by a special ability of a free skill rank. Represent that by unique abilities. I actually saw one online that I thought was absolutely brilliant. If you want to do this, just file this in your mental Rolodex. This species can make an Arcana skill check without ranks in the skill.
Oh.
How simple and elegant is that? Because core rules, you can't make the check without a rank in the skill.
Yeah.
Well, that species can because they're natively infused with arcane magic. Doesn't mean they're trained in it. They don't get the free rank. All right. But it's going to be a flat dice pool of greens, but they can at least attempt the check.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really unique take. And even then, that unique ability was priced out pretty heavily.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the species had like 75 or 80 starting XP. But well, anyway. So okay, that's special abilities. And Huli, if you want to give additional skills, people say, you know what, I'm not happy with one skill. I want them to have 2 ranks in 2 different skills. You can do that.
You can.
Just remember that a single skill rank is going to take another 5 XP if it's not well synergized off of the starting XP. And if it's really well synergized, it'll take 10 XP off the starting XP. You could do that. I mean, from a balance perspective, you can give them 3 free ranks, 4 free ranks. We wouldn't recommend that.
No.
But it's going to keep chipping away at that starting XP.
Absolutely. And the clone does something very, very similar to that, where it does a little bit differently, where it gives 2 ranks to a particular skill, which is quite unique. But there's a lot of downsides, obviously, from a story perspective when it comes to clones. So, there's so many different ways to do this. And it's all going to be dependent on, again, and I know I keep going back to it, but playtesting is the only way that you can find out whether it actually is balanced. Because when you're in the heat of the moment and you're working this out and you're going, this is amazing, and I think that this would be great, and this is groundbreaking, and then all of a sudden it's compared to other skills and other archetypes, and then all of a sudden you realize, yeah, okay, this is a little bit broken. So you just have to be prepared to, if you GM or if you're, playtesting this and you've developed this thing, don't be disheartened when you find out that it doesn't quite work. There are reasons why it doesn't quite work. So
be prepared to nerf it, be prepared to change it. So, okay, speaking of what doesn't quite work and what does work, and also as a way to really help balance a lot of this out, let's finish our discussion on just general species creation by talking about probably the hardest part of the discussion, which is unique abilities.
Absolutely. Now, on page 193, it gives a pretty good list of a number of them: amphibious, exotic, atmosphere breather, regeneration, environmentally adapted, artificial, dark vision, which is a popular one for obviously fantasy settings, and claws, which is another popular one as well. So that's a selection of them, and they each give how much XP each one of those are.
Yeah, and it actually tells you what it's worth. And this is important because unique abilities are very hard to price out. There are a few general rules of thumb for unique abilities, though. They should be at the power level of a tier 1 talent. If and again, so basically your archetype, without adjusting the starting XP at all, they can get a unique ability that is about the level of a tier 1 talent. Okay, that's the level of value benefit it should provide. If it is more, and again, it can't be a talent. We talked about that. If it's more powerful than that, and they are here, and they're listed very clearly in this on page 193 of these examples, they should cost 5 to 10 starting XP. All right. So that's. So and to give you an example, something like dark vision. Dark vision is a great example. That's the equivalent of a tier 1 talent. If you were to tack that on as another unique ability, it would cost 5 XP. That's clearly laid out there. Okay, which means that they're going to get it, quote unquote, for free as a part of that starting layout. That's a fantastic example. Dark vision. Environmentally adapted is another one because it's fairly low grade. That's when they can remove 1 setback die imposed by conditions matching their particular native climate. Like extreme cold or extreme heat, basically. Yep. Those are really, really good examples. But of all the ones you listed, Hooli, what really I think is important to take away is that good unique abilities are not ones that can be easily defined by a talent or a skill.
Yeah. And the first one would definitely, from my perspective, and I know that it's the most expensive one there, but is regeneration. And it's, it's 15 XP cost. And that's a big chunk of real estate when it comes off your XP total. It may not seem like a lot, but 15 XP, you start trying to bump up your attributes with what's left over. You find yourself running very, very short.
Absolutely. And regeneration is a great example. Another heavy example is artificial. Also amphibious is minus 10 XP. Another great example, and one again that you could never define by a talent or skill usage. Flight, the ability to fly or to hover, naturally. But the most important thing about unique abilities, and this is where you can really have fun with the XP economy, these abilities do not have to be, these unique abilities do not have to be positive in nature. No. In fact, they can be flat out hindrances and drawbacks. And some of the stuff that's even listed here, like exotic atmosphere breather, or fearsome, these are ones that actually are called out, like, yo, you're an exotic atmosphere breather. That's going to give you 10 XP to your starting XP because it's a major character limitation. Fearsome really sucks. It hinders you in a lot of ways, but not a whole lot. So that's going to give you 5 XP. So if you're in that situation where you're starting to add unique abilities that are really heavily costed, or skill ranks that are really heavily costed, or gosh, I really want them to have 2 3s in this particular thing, in this particular characteristic. You're going to start reaching that point. It's like, well, God, I'm down to 50 or 60 or 70 starting XP. No player's going to want to take that. Start tacking on negative unique abilities that will raise that starting XP up. Yep. It's like, oh yeah, you get 2 free ranks in a skill, but you require an exotic atmosphere breath mask to breathe. All right. And that can really help bring things back up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah.
So it's a really fun exercise to kind of go through and do this. And now that we've laid all this out, let's put our review of this information into task, and let's talk specifically about creating burly species. The Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the Genesys universe.
That's
get to the chopper.
Yeah, that's terrible. So that's going to be. Thanks, Arnie. So you've got basically the things such as your tank, your melee monster, anyone like your orcs, your ogres, that sort of thing. That's where you're looking at your big burly, and I know that they have the labourer as well. So when it comes to the core rules, so if you're looking at it's anyone who you feel would be benefiting from BRAWN. So that's normally going to be, you're going to have at least a brawn of 3. Most likely you're going to have a brawn of 3. Anything higher, and that's where it gets a little bit broken, but we'll get into that in the tech.
And that's the thing, that general focus that it embodies. I mean, you say the tank, the melee monster, the orc, things like that. There's different kinds of brawn character focus, yes?
Absolutely. You could have an athlete, for example, that is a lot more sort of, it's not just your typical, bash grunt, Hulk smash type person. It could be someone who uses their athletics as their primary ability. So they have brawn there for a reason, but they also, their presence might be one. Who knows? But in either case, you've really basically got to work out what your dump stat is going to be.
That's what matters. Yeah.
I mean, because as part of our creation process, we've chosen that brawn is going to be where our 3 goes. So we need to work out where that 1 is going to go. And I think that it's going to be dependent highly on what theme you're going for the species that you're trying to create.
Yes. So there's, when you're thinking of somebody burly, there are usually the first thing that comes to mind are there's three classical tropes that go with that. Okay. The first is big and dumb.
Right.
All right. The second is big and mean. All right. The third is big and slow.
Yep.
All right. And what, culturally speaking, thematically speaking, where does this brawn focused species you're creating sit? And are they big and dumb? All right, then put the 1 in intellect. Are they big and mean? All right, meaning they're nasty, they scare the crap out of people, they're gruff and unlikable, and nobody wants to deal with them. Put it in presence. Put the 1 in presence. If they're big and slow, you put it in agility.
Makes total sense. Now you could obviously you can go in and put it in and look at cunning and as well if you wanted to. But generally speaking, and willpower as well. But generally speaking, if that's your normal tropes, is the intellect, the presence, and your agility. Definitely.
And honestly, those are good trade-offs because I'm sorry, if you're making a brawn heavy character, a low agility means less ranged combat, and that's a major problem. Low intellect's used for a lot of very important things. And then presence as well, social, social capability. Those are big things. It's like, oh no, my cunning is reduced. It affects my perception and survival. that stinks, but it's not as big a deal. Yeah. And honestly, the same goes for willpower.
Yeah.
That's I hate to say it. Additionally, and I will have. Okay, there is one thing that I will caution against. Especially when it comes to using willpower as a dump stat.
Right.
With a brawly character, that should probably be the last one you consider for a dump stat, and I'll tell you why. There is one common skill that is frequently taken or associated with a burly, brawny character that has willpower as its attribute. And you know what I'm talking about. That skill is
coercion.
That skill is okay. So I've actually made this mistake in design before, where I've gone ahead and made willpower the dump stat, and then it was like, but then they become a character that has no coercive capability, and something like scathing tirade can go so great with a brawny character sometimes. Just keep that in mind.
Yep.
Just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
It's okay, Huli. That's where your 1s can go. Your 1 can. And we already talked to, obviously, if this is a brawn focused character, it's where you're going to put your 3. Are you ever going to want to go higher than 3?
Look, maybe. To be honest, okay, let's look at Star Wars because it's got the greatest array of species which are out there. There is literally 1 species that has higher than a 3. And there's some massive drawbacks to that character, that species type. and they've got an intellect of 4. And they really are a bit of a one-trick pony. But generally speaking, that's exactly right, the droll. So you really don't need to go anything above 3. I don't think you do. Because the other thing to take into consideration is that when it comes to bumping up your abilities as well, later on down the track, you can't do it as easily as what you could with Star Wars.
Correct.
You know, the dedication, you can only do it once. So, you know, once per attribute. So, yeah, something to consider there. But, yeah, I think that there is more bang for buck by having a greater spread rather than putting all your eggs in one basket, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. You got a point. I mean, if you have a really dedicated brawn concept, I mean, it's really you probably won't hear the same warning from me when we talk about other types of species. But when you're talking about brawn specifically, bumping that brawn, people say, "Oh wow, well okay, you know, so oh wow, I get an extra die in my athletics pools, and you know my brawl and melee pools, big whoop." Yeah, that is a big whoop. Yep. Additionally, if you're using melee, that's an extra point of damage immediately. But let's also talk about the one thing that we haven't talked about yet when it comes to brawly characters, and that is soak.
Yes. Yes.
Going to a 4 from a 2 in brawn gives an extra 2 points of soak. Yep. And that is staggeringly good. So you run the risk of some imbalance. Now, that imbalance is taken up by a few things. If you decide to go from a 3 to a 4 in brawn, that's going to reduce your starting XP 40 points. Okay? And you could make that up by, you know what, they don't have a free skill. You know what, they have 3 drawback special abilities, you know, or unique abilities. But really, who would want to play that kind of character?
Well, the only sort of character that comes to mind with that sort of thing is that if you had some sort of an ogre, for example, where they're slow-witted, they're a little bit on the, you know, they're not really good with people type thing, that you might want to have like a 4 in a brawn, and then their agility and their presence might be 1. Just depends.
So yeah, that's actually a really interesting idea. Is you can also reduce the characteristics. So yeah, if we were to set out like an ogre, and you decided to go with a 4 in brawn, okay, if you dropped intellect and presence to 1, that's going to give you 20 XP. Okay, so now you're only 20 plus. So now you're only minus 20 XP. Yep. If you give them the fearsome ability, which they would certainly have, now they're only down 15 XP. And basically, that's an 85 starting XP for that character. That actually sounds pretty freaking balanced for an ogre.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, something to that effect. You know, and honestly, you could probably say, you know what, I really do want their wound threshold to be higher because they're a freaking ogre. And I don't care about the wound threshold folly. What is the wound threshold folly? We'll talk about that in a moment. You know, and so I want to throw an extra 2 points into wounds. Okay, well, now they're an 80 starting XP character. That's actually fairly reasonable. It's a super one-trick pony, but it's at least balanced.
Yeah, look, the other thing as well is when you're doing stuff like that, there isn't a lot of flavor to it.
Yeah.
So they don't really have any sort of special abilities that, you know, that they might have 1 rank in sort of survival or something like that because they're used to living out in the wilderness. But generally speaking, it's pretty bland. So if you're maybe a bit of a power gamer, it might be okay. But I think that you would need to seriously look at some further downsides, so you could at least have something which is going to give a little bit more flavor to playing that particular character and wanting players to play that particular character as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Luke, I teased it a moment ago, so let's talk about it now. And you kind of mentioned it already. when it comes to the brawn focused species, let's talk about the wound threshold folly. So there's this instinct, like for a burly species, people say, I 10 plus brawn. No, it needs to be higher than that. You know, they're a burly brawn focused character. They need to have, 12 plus brawn, 13 plus brawn for their wound threshold. And is this wise?
Yeah, no. No, it's not. Unless, again, this is the theme that you're going for. But the thing is it's going to break your game. It means that, they're going to be nigh unstoppable. And that can sometimes cause a little bit of frustration from the GM's perspective, as well as the other player's perspective, because, Grog, the ogre barbarian, never gets hit. He never has to spend any points on any sort of gold on any sort of healing and whatever else, because it's just, you hardly get through his soak, and you also hardly get through the wounds. So, it can be a little bit frustrating. So I think that there really should be, caution spent when you're doing it that way.
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. I mean, it may seem like a good idea at the time, but you have to realize that it's not just the 10 you're increasing. You've already increased the brawn, so they're already going to be a 1-up. And brawn increases soak. Yep. People, it increases soak. So you really need to be careful.
Yeah.
Just a word of warning.
Absolutely.
So, okay, before we get into unique abilities, let's talk about skill usage so that we can talk about the special ability, the free skill rank.
Yep.
Okay. Obviously, we have brawn focused skills. Now, if you decide to take a free rank in a brawn focused skill where it's going to have good synergy, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you an extra 5 XP. Okay. And I kind of talked briefly about this earlier, but when it comes to brawn focused skills, let's focus on those. Let's say you want to do that. You're fine taking I'll go from 100 XP to 95 starting XP so that I can have a good synergy starting rank. Even with that, as you said before, it's very unwise to give a free rank in a combat skill. Very unwise. But what about the other brawl skills? I mean, what do you find valuable and under what tropes?
So for strength, there's really only 2 skills that are outside of combat skills, and that's going to be resilience and athletics. Those skills don't come up all that often. Athletics probably more so. But resilience is a skill, and it's actually something that we will talk about at a later episode when we talk about how to use these sorts of skills and how to use them in your game, is because it is rarely used. But it sets a certain theme when it comes to resilience, because you automatically assume, so, throw them out in the middle of the wilderness and they have to walk from one point of the desert to the next. They're probably going to be making a resilience roll of some sort. Or if they're poisoned, that they're a little bit sturdier. So it may not get used, but it certainly gives them that flavor.
Yeah. And, you could even go so far as to, athletics is definitely much more used, but with the tropes, like, if I'm building a guy who's, when we were talking about a brawn based character, he's strong.
Yep. Okay.
He or she is strong. But as far as the trope, are they a strong man or are they a tough man? You know what I mean? This is one of the ways that if you decide to go for a brawn focused skill, you can really, tacitly enforce that distinction for your players.
Yep.
If they're, if they get a free rank in athletics, okay, then wow, then they can conduct that's a species that's there for feats of strength. If they get a free rank in resilience, they're a species that's tough, right? And that's that real distinction there.
Yeah.
But what about non-brawl skills? Are there good fits for certain themes and tropes for brawny character types? And are there some that simply don't fit at all?
Okay, so we've already mentioned one of them, and that is the social skill of coercion, because it's kind of makes sense. And it's, I know that I've been in campaigns before where people have become frustrated because they have these large characters, but they have like 1 in willpower. And they've forgotten to spend, because it doesn't necessarily come up all that often, that they've forgotten to spend any points in coercion. And suddenly you've sort of tried to work out a way that makes sense narratively. So why not do that from the start? As soon as the gates open, you should be looking at, reducing the sort of the dump stat usage on willpower, as you mentioned before, and then coercion as a thematic skill to couple it in.
Yeah,
mechanics is another one as well. Yeah, mechanics is another one. Mechanics is something that, your big burly engineer that lifts his own speeder to work under the bonnet type thing, that sort of thing. And then again,
that's now mechanics is an intellect based skill, and we said before that's a prime candidate as a dump stat.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's okay. This helps you overcome that dump slightly.
Absolutely.
But I have to say on coercion, man, I highly recommend it. I'm glad you said it. Coercion is like the number one choice. And one more thing on coercion, very few melee combatant or brawn focused careers offer coercion as a career skill.
That's right.
Very few. So that means you're not going to get a free rank in it at character creation. So getting a free rank from your species really, really, really helps to round out a cool brawny concept.
Yep. Absolutely.
It can, yeah.
But what about the ones that don't really mention, or are there other ones that you think would be benefiting from?
Honestly, I really like, and I mentioned it before, I think survival is another good one for tropey, for tropiness, because the idea of the barbarian or the the orc wild man, okay, survival, very, very thematic and appropriate choice. Yep. That you can think about for a free rank. So I mean, honestly, and these were kind of the big three that we'd come up with, which was thematically. Coercion, excellent choice. I mean, assuming you're going to stay outside of brawn skills, of course. Coercion, excellent choice. Mechanics, because int is usually a dump stat, so that can make an interesting concept depending on the setting, especially if you have a high technology setting where you have a spacefaring species that's going to be doing that kind of stuff. And then survival, obviously, especially in a fantasy setting, it makes a lot of sense. Yep. What skills should you typically avoid? What are going to be not just, hey, these synergize okay, and that means they're good, but what's anti-synergistic? What are the skill choices you should probably avoid, like the plague? They're going to really add almost no value to a brawny character with a brawny career.
Much of your social skills, other than coercion, as we've already mentioned. So most of your social skills. Because chances are that your burly warrior is not going to be the one that's going to be getting up and doing the negotiation for the trade deal between two countries. That sort of thing is just not going to happen. So, I would be staying away from social skills and maybe even your intellect skills as well.
Yes. The intellect skills, I mean, depending on the knowledge skill you have, if you had like a knowledge warfare, that might be reasonable. Yep. But unlikely. So the big ones for me, as you mentioned, are obviously the majority of the social skills, but the other kicker that I honestly think you should avoid like the plague for a brawny character, because it is anti-thematic, is stealth.
Yes.
All right. And it's interesting because we agility may very well be your dump stat for this particular species, if that's what you called out. But whether it is or isn't, burly characters are never known for being stealthy. Whether they're big and dumb, whether they're big and slow, or whether they're big and mean, they're never big and fast or big and sneaky. Big and sneaky do not go together ever.
Absolutely.
All right. So honestly, I would avoid stealth like the plague. It's anti-thematic. I'm sure the player would love to have that, which should tell you right then and there that it's a bad idea.
And I guess coordination to a certain extent as well, because it doesn't sort of mix in with that theme, but certainly stealth more so than anything else.
Shall we move to the last aspect of Burly character creation?
I think that would be great.
The fun
part.
the fun of unique abilities.
Yes.
Okay, so we've gone through some of the ones that are in the book, and our goal for this recurring series, guys, is obviously we've gone through some core advice, but we really want to focus in on some of the unique abilities that you can come up with that are either reskinning of existing abilities that are out there in the core book or in other supplements, but also whole cloth things, and really kind of draw into the mechanics behind how these things should work, and if they cost anything extra, what they should cost. And with that, there are a couple of things to there's really two broad categories of unique abilities. All right. And we can see these in the published archetypes and species that are there now. Okay. There are potent abilities. All right. Powerful ones that are typically linked to once an encounter or story point driven. Yep. So you got to spend a story point to do it, or both. If they're really powerful. Yep. And then you compare and contrast that with the other category of unique abilities, which are what are less potent, but they're always on. Yeah. Okay. You always have access to them. They don't cost you anything to do. They're just kind of always there. And that's where you're really kind of replicating tier 1 or tier 2 talent territory at that point.
That's right.
So are there, if we're talking mechanically here, yep, are there some common mechanical concepts that we see throughout unique abilities, in the game that we could replicate for brawny characters? What are some of the fundamental, if we're peeling the skin back and really looking at the bones of the system here, what are some of the fundamental mechanical concepts in unique abilities?
Okay. So I think we're looking at things like character substitution for other skills. Now, what do we mean by that, Chris?
So characteristic substitution for other skills is typically very powerful. It's a once an encounter ability, or once a session or story point driven, where you are using the BRAWN characteristic for a skill that it does not belong to.
Exactly. Now, this is something that I'm a big believer in Legend of the Five Rings. Obviously, I've written for Legend of the Five Rings with FFG. And one of the things that they've done quite well is they've completely decoupled abilities, or attributes, should I say, from skills. And then you've just got this mix mash of whatever stance that you want to use is what you apply, and it has some sort of thematic meaning.
Yeah.
You can do that in Star Wars. You can do that in Genesys. The thing is, and Chris, you've mentioned this a number of times on your podcast, is that yes, you can do it. Should you do it often? No. And the reason is that it lessens the expenditure that other PCs have spent on talents that allow this to happen.
Exactly.
But sometimes this can happen, and this is probably the best place to do it. Is do it as a species-only ability because it's unique, and it really suits that theme.
Yes. And it needs to cost. It needs to be like once a session. It may even cost a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we did that when talking about Knight's Edge. We did that with one of the werewolf types. That was part of their ability, that they could, when making a coercion check, or I think it might have been leadership, I can't remember right now, but they would use their brawn instead of their willpower. So,
yes,
that's what we mean by characteristic substitution when it comes to a skill. So, yeah.
Yes. Now, there is another type of characteristic substitution that we also see out there for unique abilities. So the first one was characteristic substitutions in other skills, okay? And that could be something like, and to come back to that very briefly, that could be something like, once a session, spend a story point to use the brawn characteristic for a non-brawn skill for one check, right? The other characteristic substitution is an interesting one we're starting to see a bit more of. Mm-hmm. And this is characteristic substitution for skill ranks. Not the characteristic associated with it, but the ranks of the skill. Yeah. All right. This is not something we see too terribly often in brawn, but it's extremely common in intellect. Mm-hmm. Okay. But it may work for you in brawn, where when you do this, it typically doesn't cost a destiny point because it's not that huge of a break, but it's definitely going to be a once a session ability. Where once per session, use your brawn characteristics as the skill ranks in another brawn based skill. So, for example, I've got a brawn of 4. Yep. All right. I had 3 from my species, and I decided to spend another 40 creating my character to push my brawn to 4. Okay. So that's my brawn. I got a brawn of 4. Brouhaha. Look at me. However, I really don't have any ranks in resilience. Okay. I put my ranks in combat skills, and I put a couple ranks in athletics. All right. That's what I did. Right. And I get poisoned. Well, I'm a strong and burly dude, and the GM's about to ask me to make a 4 purple difficulty resilience check. And boy, I have 4 greens in that pool, but I'm really not liking those odds. Those 50-50 odds just aren't quite good enough for me. Yep. I can, once per session, say, you know what? I'm going to all of a sudden have 4 ranks in resilience. So at that point, I'm rolling 4 yellow. Yep. You feel me? Yep. And that's in a brawn-based skill. You could also potentially use this in other skills, which can lead to a lot of interesting fun. Like non-brawn-based skills. But yeah, that's the core of that. So those are 2 common mechanical concepts: characteristic substitution into another skill and characteristic substitution for skill ranks. We've seen that before. Yep. What other common mechanical concepts for unique abilities do we see that we can replicate?
Well, when we're talking about theme, I think the one of the better ones is to look at damage reduction or some sort of soak increase. So that's to sort of represent your tough burly guys, rather than giving them additional wounds that they would have all the time. You might want to look at reducing the damage. And when we sort of, I guess, coupled with that, is you can look at critical injury reduction as well. Yeah. So, you're kind of looking at it in both ways, I guess. But a soak increase is a good one to have, without having to affect your base attribute, which will have obviously ramifications throughout the other skills or multiple skills. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the critical injury reduction, where you might have the equivalent of burly, where it's reducing it by 10. So, for example, the labourer, it has tough as nails from the core rulebook, and then the dwarf, both the Dunoir, and the forged dwarves, they have an ability that does exactly the same. So yeah.
Yeah, and tough as nails is, so let's talk about damage reduction, or I should say soak increase first. When you talk about that, that's not, when we say that's not a permanent thing.
No.
That again is a spend a story point, or once a session, you can increase your soak. You can double your soak against one attack, right, or one hit. Mm-hmm. All right, once a session. Yep. That's what that represents. But tough as nails is just as wicked, man. I mean, and I'm opening my book, and I'm pulling it up right now, right. To take a look at the laborer, because I actually have my core book close to me. There it is. And yeah, that's right. Once a session, spend a story point as an out of turn incidental, and when you get critted, doesn't matter what was rolled, it's a 1.
Yep.
I mean, that's what it is. Okay. And that's the level of power you're going for here.
Yeah.
And, often, you find these, and this is kind of another recurring theme with one real exception. Most of two real exceptions when we look at unique abilities that are out there for burly characters. They're typically big bang things that happen once a session and cost a story point. All right. Now the last two common mechanical concepts to look at don't really fall in that regard.
No.
They're kind of always on, but one of them is extremely situational.
Yeah, true.
And that would be damage boosting for melee attacks. What on earth am I talking about? I'm talking about rage.
Yes.
When you're injured or when you just decide to become enraged, you can gain a boost to damage on melee attacks and brawl attacks. Typically a +1. That all started infamously with the Wookiees in Star Wars. But if you're looking for some Genesis examples, the varied subspecies of orcs in Tyrannoth have very uniquely different damage boosting abilities of sort of going into rage, basically. And in some cases it happens, when your strain threshold is lowered to half. Sometimes it's like when you want to. But the ability to sort of either because you've been injured or hurt or strained, or because you've just gotten angry, the ability to sort of go into rage, every once in a while, or when a certain condition is met, to, pop a +1 to, melee or brawl damage. That's a really reasonable and cool, unique ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other one is the natural melee attack. So if you've got claws or if you've got a sharp tail or something like that, that's the other one that it's just an add-on. But it can add so much flavor. So if you've got, for example, if you had, just moving away from burly for a moment, but if you've got a cat species, you would have claws because they're renowned for that. And it presents that imagery of those claws. But bringing it back to burly, if you've got somebody who, in your mind's eye, that they have razor sharp teeth, a natural melee attack may be something which is, quite fitting for what you have in mind.
Yes. And claws are specifically called out in the core rulebook, and it's in line with a tier 1 talent. They cost it out at 5 XP. And I really do like that. But it is important to note that even if you're making a burly character, all right, you do not want to go hog wild with your natural attack capability. And what do I mean? Even if you have a natural attack, even if you do, there is still a defined limit that you want to stick yourself to when it comes to the amount of damage you can deal, but also more importantly, your crit rating and any special abilities the attack may have. And when you take a look specifically at the claws, unique ability on page 193 in the Genesys core rulebook, they basically say, look, it's a +1 to your base unarmed damage. That's it. It's just brawn +1. All right. And a crit rating of 3.
Yep.
That's it. That is what is worth 5 XP. No vicious, no pierce, nothing like that. That's where you're going to start increasing your XP cost a little bit there. But that's really what you're talking about, is just an always on +1 damage to your natural attack specifically with a crit of 3. I mean, that's really what it is. It doesn't have to be claws either. It could be, maybe you make a Klingons because you decide you want to do Star Trek and, they can headbutt people or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I didn't even think of that. That's good. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can do. Definitely.
All sorts of things you can do. And I know as we talk a little bit about the one of the species that you're going to make, I think a natural attack might be very fitting,
yes,
actually.
Indeed. Very good.
But maybe we can use that to maybe juice it up a little bit and talk about what that might mean for your XP economy.
Definitely. So speaking of which, is that what we should do next?
Well, this is a great way to end the conversation. We've gone through some a pretty rambling talk here. Let's build a burly archetype right now on the show.
Right.
And you had an idea in mind.
I did. Now, if I had a choice, and a whole heap more time, I'd love to get back into WoW Classic. I loved WoW when it first came out, and I'm a big WoW player. Haven't done it for a long time, but I love it. So I would love to play a Tauren. I love my Horde.
I love the Tauren. Okay.
Now, actually, while we've sort of been thinking about this, I don't know whether I'd actually do it as a brawn character, but I'd probably do it more as a willpower character in actual fact, because they're more sort of, or even cunning, because they're more sort of primal based. And so if you were to have like a druid type character, that you would have it more like that sort of focus. But I think definitely willpower or cunning and willpower will not be my dump stat. So
okay. So for the purposes of our discussion,
yes,
though, can we make it a brawn
absolutely
character?
That's what we're going to do. So
and you're going with the WoW mythos, but honestly, this species we could just call it a Tauren. It doesn't have to be WoW.
Yeah.
I'm almost thinking the equivalent, like they're half orcs, extremely common in most fantasy settings, right?
Yep.
Basically, this is a half Minotaur.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so you've got those Tauren features, but you're not 12 feet tall, and with fangs, and okay. So okay. So all right, Hooli, we got your 100 starting XP here, and I'm making notes here as we go. We got 100 starting XP. Yep. How do you want your characteristic layout to be based on what we've talked about?
So I'm thinking that obviously Brawn's going to be the 3. I think that because they are, I'd like to, even if you were talking about Minotaurs for, like from Dragonlance, for example, they're all very much, willpower based. Their survival is a big thing with them. And so since survival is a cunning skill, that I think that we'll leave cunning as the 2. As far as the dump stat, they're not really sort of fast. So I'm thinking that agility is where my 1's going to be.
I like it. So you're going to keep your 2 in cunning, willpower, and presence. Yep. Okay. All right. I've got that noted. Now after that we have wound threshold and strain threshold.
Right.
So you got 10 plus brawn and 10 plus willpower right now, which is going to be a 3 and 2 respectively. Are you happy with that, or do you want to take any of them up or down?
Look, I'm sort of more inclined to just leave them as 10-10, to be honest. I don't think that if I want to have a higher wound threshold, I'll be obviously taking up my brawn. And my willpower is going to be set at 2, so I'm automatically starting at 12 anyway. So, unless that, this particular Minotaur that you are using is always going to be using some sort of magic, you might consider having a higher a higher strain threshold, so that you could do more magic tricks and things like that. But generally speaking, I'm pretty happy with 10-10.
Okay. Well, if you're willing to lower one of them, you can get yourself some more starting XP, but we'll come to that.
That is true.
So, all right, next up is special ability. So for special ability, you're going to get a free rank and a skill. What are you thinking?
Look, I'm thinking survival. I think that's sort of generally speaking across the board, that seems to be something that Tauren / your Minotaurs would have. Maybe
I completely agree.
Another exception to that would obviously be like knowledge dungeoneering, perhaps, if you're going by the old mythical version of the Minotaur in the maze. You might be looking at something like that.
All right, so you got subspecies basically, right?
Yes.
I love it. You've got your deep Tauren and your surface Tauren.
Correct.
And deep Tauren and knowledge dungeoneering.
Yes.
I absolutely love it. And since you've got your 2 in cunning, willpower, presence, and intellect, that's really not a bad Okay, so you got survival free rank as your special ability. Let's get into your unique abilities.
Right.
So for unique abilities, what are you thinking, man? I've got some ideas, but what are you thinking?
I'm thinking hooves/horns is probably the first most. I mean, they're bulls at the end of the day. So yeah,
natural
attack. That's exactly right.
Natural attack +1 with a crit 3.
Yep.
Now, I want to do something a little unusual here. Okay. All right. I'd like to make a suggestion that is going to decrease your starting XP.
I think I know where you're going to go, but I'll let you go for it. I have a thought.
I want to add a special feature to your natural attack that that natural attacks don't normally have.
Right.
I want to add for Tauren knockdown. You think that's fitting?
What's interesting, and this is something that I found out recently, is that all natural attacks have knockdown automatically.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. They do.
Yeah, I was corrected on this recently. So we don't actually need that. But
okay, we don't need that. And but what?
But one of the things that, and I'm not sure how we're going to go, but something perhaps like a charge, or something maybe like that when they perform a knockdown, that that they can move them a certain, no pun intended there, that they move them a certain range band, or they can move them anywhere within short range.
I like the idea. The problem is that that's very much almost like a talent.
It is. It is.
In like a bull rush. I was thinking because it's horns, I was thinking of adding a pierce 1 to your natural attack.
That's a good point. That's a good call. I like it.
Okay. So if we added pierce 1, basically that would probably decrease your starting XP by another 5.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that would put you down to 95 starting XP. But now I have a suggestion, which may give you back that 5 XP.
Okay.
Considering the nature of this half minotaur thing, how about we give it another unique ability of fearsome?
Yep. Fearsome sounds good to me.
All right. So that actually brings you back up to 100 XP. Yep. So I want to talk this out. So far, we've created a really decent Tauren that actually has 100 starting XP. That's pretty insane.
Yep.
Are you happy with this, or do we want to maybe go a little further and maybe find a way to bring that starting XP down? Because another common thing you see is really unique species concepts typically have lower starting XP. Yep. If you were to drop this down to 90 as starting XP, you could get another 10 XP of really cool stuff. You could potentially give yourself another skill, or even another decent unique ability, or a couple of them. I mean, you could add more onto your natural attack. You could add dark vision.
Yep, that's what I was thinking, because we talked about it. I mean, I've thought about it more from a perspective of if you were having subspecies of Minotaur. But in this case, I think that dark vision would work in perfectly.
Okay, well, that'll bring you back down to 95. Starting XP.
One of the things that I've thought about is, because depending on how your setting is, you've got, and I have to go back to Star Wars for this, but you've got the Ewoks, which have primitive as an ability. And it's a downside because, obviously using any sort of technology or whatever else is difficult for them. But, that since they're more isolationists, they tend to be more attuned with nature rather than technology. That might be an option as well.
Yeah. I don't know if that would go too well with a fantasy setting, though, because at that point, I mean, everything's fairly primitive. But it's a good thought if you're going to develop Tauren in a science fiction or space opera style setting. Now, if you really wanted to go hell for leather on this, you could also give the Tauren regeneration. That would bring it down. That would bring it down to 80 starting XP. It's a thought.
I'm not too sure it goes with theme, but I mean, it depends on what you want to do. But I mean, regeneration is a powerful ability, and it's a reason why it's 15 XP. But
it's a very powerful ability. Yeah.
Another thing as well that you mentioned as well when it comes to your wound threshold as well. I know that we talked about that. You don't want to go crazy with a high brawn, high wound threshold. But if they are supposed to be that sort of, burly and whatever else, maybe that is adding a bit more of the theme to it. But I think I'm going to go with regeneration. I like that idea.
Well, maybe we can do a couple other things to even it out. Mm-hmm. So, all right. Wow, what a species. It's got so far 4 unique abilities. It's got natural attack, fearsome, dark vision, and regeneration. Mm-hmm. Now that regeneration is going to bring you down to 80 starting XP. Now maybe because of the unique concept of this character, you're fine with that. This is a pretty boss set of things. But keep in mind that, I don't know how you want to go with this, but often another common trope we see with burly characters is their strain thresholds are typically reduced.
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. If you were to go to a 9+ on your strain threshold, you'd jump up to 85 starting XP at this point. If you went to an 8+ on your strain threshold, which is very low, you would actually be back up to 95 starting XP.
And you know what? I think I'm going to do that.
Oh, wow. All right. He's a glass cannon, at least in terms of strain.
Yep.
I absolutely love it. Okay, so if we bring you down to an 8+ on your strain threshold, that is going to be 95 starting XP yet again.
Yep.
Holy smokes.
That's I mean, again, that would require a lot of playtesting. But
it absolutely would. Yeah, you know what? Here's what we can do. Mm-hmm. Why don't we bump your wound threshold up to 12+ as well? That'll bring you down to 90 starting XP. Yep. Would that work?
That would work.
I think that's reasonable. Okay. So what we've got then is we have GM Hooley's Tauren. All right. 3 in brawn, 2 in cunning, willpower, presence, and intellect, and a 1 in agility. Mm-hmm. You got 12+ brawn for wound threshold, 8+ willpower for strain threshold. Yikes. All right. 90 starting XP.
Yep.
A free rank survival. And then 4 unique abilities: a natural attack of +1, brawn +1, crit 3, pierce 1, fearsome, dark vision, and regeneration.
Yeah. That's insane. And what's funny, and just to prove that I am not a power gamer in any way, shape, or form, I would so play a druid with this character type.
It sounds like a truly fantastic druid. Or a primal magic user of some type.
Exactly.
I absolutely love it. Wonderful. Well, Gamer Nation, hopefully this and Hooli, maybe people can go to our social media page or our website after this episode airs, and maybe they can find this species Tauren fully statted out. Do you think maybe they could find that? I think
they might be able to find that just by going to Facebook or our website. We'll make sure that that's available there for download. And let us know. Play test it out. Tell us if it's completely and utterly broken. And if you've decided to use it, let us know how you're using it in your games. So, but yeah, that's a good example, I think, of just using the core rulebook, nothing else, to stat out exactly what a Tauren or a Minotaur might actually look like. So, hopefully that's helped you out.
Love it. And, PC friendly. So I absolutely love it. Well, Gamer Nation, I hope this conversation, around species archetype creation, has been beneficial for you. Obviously, we're going to have some more in this series as we go through different types of characters instead of just the Arnold Schwarzeneggers. But this has been a very fun discussion.
Indeed. Very good.
So I absolutely love it. But sir, do we have we have another segment we need to get to?
We do. We have a special guest that we're going to talk to on breaking the mold.
Oh, yay.
Breaking the mold.
All right, so the Genesys Foundry is an exciting community of fan-created content for Genesis. New settings, new rules options, adventures, campaign modules, much, much more. But some creators, of course, go above and beyond, subverting our expectations and breaking the mold with their work. Our Breaking the Mold segment is dedicated to showcasing an exciting offering available right now in the Genesys Foundry as we separate the pure alloy from the slag, and we point you to the best content out there.
Indeed. Now, tonight's guest is a fan favourite and an honoured member of the D20 Radio community. He is a staff writer for the D20 Radio blog, has created more adversaries than anyone would like to know to do with, and is the author of The Power of the Vril, a Genesis Weird War adventure, hailing from the snow-swept plains of Canada. Listeners, may we introduce you to Mr. Chris Hunt. Chris, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, eh?
Of course you'd open with that.
Oh, yeah, buddy. It's good to talk to you, Chris. How you been?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We have lots of dust here at the moment. We've got a dust storm coming through, which is fairly bizarre, but yeah, it's all good.
Your continent is like hell on earth. I mean, dust storms, spiders the size of dinner plates, snakes that can kill you by looking at you. I mean, what? It's just awful.
Yeah,
it's just awful. But you do have kangaroos.
That is true. Very good. So, Chris, you've joined us here this evening to talk about your product. But before we get on to that, let's hear a little bit about yourself and your gaming career.
Sure. Well, I mean, in real life, I'm a full-time grad student, part-time Army reservist, but more to the point, I've recently busted in something you'll know, Hooli, into the world of freelance RPG writing, including one unannounced title from FFG, so very proud about that.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I think I'm living your life here, just waiting. Come on, like F5ing the FFG site. Is it announced yet? No? Okay, yeah.
It's a difficult process.
But yeah, in terms of my gaming background, it's funny, whenever you have like Sam, Gregor, or Stuart on, it's funny because I have almost the same gateway as him, where I played Neverton Knights, like when I was 13 years old, the D&D 3.0 game online. I'm like, oh, what is this thing? I can be this class, I can be that thing? What's this DM tool? What's going on here? And that was kind of my gateway. That and some Star Wars role-playing on a game. You guys remember Jedi Academy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so believe it or not, there's a mod for that, and people actually would roleplay because someone made a mod where, okay, you can have a bounty hunter class, and it has like a grappling hook. So that was meant for capture the flag, but role players obviously steal everything they can, and that's how I got my in.
Right.
Before eventually saying, oh, this is good, but what if we had more control over this? Why don't we have a look? What's this like RCR Saga Edition 3.5, 4.0 D&D, and that's kind of where it started, and went from there, and all of a sudden I'm playing Dark Heresy and Cortex and all this weird stuff, 7C, and blogging about it, and then writing for I did a couple of Pathfinder third-party stuff, and now FFG, so I guess I'm hooked now.
Cool.
Well, you're hooked. You've got us hooked, and that's good. So, I mean, Chris, you've been a staff writer for D20 Radio for several years now, and obviously have been an avid player of the FFG Star Wars system to begin with, and have written a lot about that, obviously on our site. But you were also one of the early adopters, of course, as so many of us Star Wars fans were for Genesis, right? And obviously, that's the key focus of this show. What is your first love of Genesis role-playing? What style of game or game settings and themes do you like to get on the table when you play Genesis?
Well, I guess it'd be cheating if I said Star Wars, right? No. So, yeah, I mean, the narrative dice, which is just perfected to, like, degree in Genesis, is just so amazing. I think we'll talk about this later, but the adventure that I wrote was based on let's just run a cool game set, World War II. I don't really have I have like nothing prepped, and let's just get to the table, have a good time. I did the same thing for my girlfriend's family. We did like a Western thing where I'm like, oh, let me just do some weapons up, help them make characters. We'll get right in. So anything that's got action, team players meaningful ways to interact with the narrative and the role, anything where you need to keep things going, and anything where you want the players to be excited about, oh, I rolled a triumph, great. Oh, I rolled despair, even better, right? So that's my broad strokes love of this, is that it works for anything that you want to have high energy, keep the game rolling. And that's why I think you see so many different things coming up on the Foundry and so many different requests for official FFG IPs to be covered.
Absolutely, and there's only so much bandwidth when it comes to people being able to write stuff for, obviously for FFG, but I mean, that's the reason why that the Foundry exists.
And also what we're here to talk about, right?
Exactly right. So, Chris, give us the pitch. Power of the Vril is a standout adventure. It's a one-shot. Using the Weird War setting that we see in the Genesys core rulebook. And can I say, it's absolutely brilliant, and, well, I mean, I play tested it, so... so tell us a little bit about it. How did it come about? What's the story?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'm happy to hear you guys love it. It means a lot to me that two greats like you give it the thumbs up. But I have a question for you guys. Would you call it? You called it brilliant. Would you call it brilliant?
That's terrible.
Oh God.
I took myself out.
Great. All right, Chris. It's been great having you on the show.
No. Yeah. So this adventure really, like, it's. Have you guys ever seen a movie called? I'm trying to remember what it is now. Normandy or something like that. But basically, it's a Weird War adventure. But the best part of Weird War adventure for me is where you start normal, and then over the course of a movie or the game, the session or adventure in this case, it gets weirder and weirder and weirder until all of a sudden you're like fighting all these weird stuff, and you're completely overwhelmed, and you're just fighting to survive, and the stakes just escalate out of control from what was just a normal mission to start.
Yep.
So that's what this adventure is all about. It starts off, it's the tail end of World War II. You're playing presumably Allied commandos. That's the 6 pre-gens I provide, and you're going to just infiltrate a Luftwaffe base, figure out what kind of super weapons are there. Thinking more like we're talking about jet aircraft and advanced bombs and that kind of stuff, advanced engineering of a normal sort, and then it escalates from there until all of a sudden you're up against this world-threatening super science magic threat that puts your 6 PCs at the heart of that adventure. That just escalates at every turn.
Awesome. You said you actually include pre-gens with it. Are pre-gens required to play the adventure, or can people use any existing Weird War characters they have?
Yeah, you can definitely use whatever characters you want. There's a section in the adventure that talks about if you want to make your own characters, what would be appropriate skills. I don't do a full Weird War sort of setting. There's obviously stuff in the JS core rulebook, and things will vary there. But I do talk about providing 2 additional classes, so the academic and the officer, 2 things I thought were not really right out of the core rulebook exactly right with what was provided. And I'd go into some skills as well, which I think are important to have in the adventure and end up using. Yep. But you could take your own event, you could take your own characters through. You could use the 6 there, whatever works.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you really have beefed up the Weird War setting in general in pieces of this module, with the addition of those things that aren't necessarily there in the core rulebook. Now, I mean, and this was going to be my next question, is really what makes this module different from some of the other content that people out there are going to find? And you've mentioned, obviously, the custom content that's available there in it. But aside from that, I mean, what else makes this really unique compared to other offerings that people might find from a module standpoint on the Foundry?
For sure. I mean, I think the big one is not only can you shoot Nazis, you can shoot super Nazis. So, I mean, really, that's that.
That should be like the only descriptive tagline for Power of the Vril. It's like a module adventure, one shot, where you shoot a bunch of Nazis. That's a huge selling point right there.
It is.
Yeah, 2 points, I guess, right? It's like, oh, what do you find in this book? Well, point 1, shoot Nazis. Point 2, shoot super Nazis.
Yeah, that has to be on the back of the book. If it's not, it needs to be.
I'll have to fix that up on Drive-Thru RPG. No, but seriously, what I really wanted to do with this adventure was put something out there that would have something for everybody. I've had some people approach me, when FFG first announced it, said, "Oh, this is amazing. I'm going to use this as an intro." And I actually redid some of the pre-gens to put in the dice pool, like the yellows and greens, to help as a teaching adventure, because it's aimed at more of a 50 XP kind of a crowd, right?
Yep.
But it's got a lot of that content we talked about. I mean, it's got some World War II content in there. We're talking NPCs like Luftwaffe field troops, Waffen SS, German half-tracks, those character options, that kind of stuff. But the thing I'm maybe the most proud about is the fact that you said it's a one-shot, and it does fit into 4 hours of play, or if you wanted to stretch it out with what's in there, you can maybe do 2 sessions. But I tried to put in a lot of adventure seeds, and there's a bit of an interlude and a conclusion that really, I hopefully gives GMs the tools and the seeds they need to, if they want to do a whole Weird War campaign, they can get Power of the Vril as the basic version here at the start. Use some of those seeds, sprinkle throughout the adventure to really stretch it out and have a whole campaign if they want. Or if they want, they can run it in a 4-hour convention slot. So
it's very cool because it's really the only one that sort of grabbed onto one of the smaller settings from the core rulebook. I'd love more people to do more of that because it gives you enough to whet your appetite. But it doesn't doesn't give you any major substance to be able to run something. But Power of the Vril certainly does. Well done. That's a great marketing ploy, I think, if nothing else. And it's a really good adventure as well. So yeah, well done.
So talk to us about the development, because we know there's a story there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is it's a module that our adventure had a long time coming. Even though it probably had a normal amount of work put into it. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, I guess, right? But yeah, like the origin of this was way back in Gen Con 4, which was the Harry Potter Magic themed one, where I was sitting there with a buddy, Will Turner. He's one of the Canadian crew that goes down to that. We scribbled down, okay, let's do some pre-gens. Let's do a Weird War adventure with Genesys. I'd never ran Genesys before, but I said, well, I mean, like I'm a pretty good seat of the pants GM. I put down like 3 or 4 story fragments, like literally a piece of paper that said, okay, 1, airbase raid, 2, the labs, 3, the bell, etc. And I just kind of ran that like on the seat of my pants with a couple guys there. So Keith Capel, Sam Gregor Stewart, obviously you, Hooley, and my buddy Will. And I just kind of ran that, had a good time, and kind of put it away until FFG asked me to say, hey, just after I submitted my first assignment for them, and just before this year's Gen Con, they said, hey, we're doing this thing called the Foundry. Are you in? Can you do a first rollout? And I said, yeah, let's do this adventure. And that's where it kind of came from.
I remember that table. I remember how incredibly fun it was. We're just watching. I didn't get to play. That angered me, but I had to work the desk. But watching, it was wonderful.
Yeah, I remember you coming over, and I'm like, oh, you're like, oh, what are you guys running? I'm like, just a World War II normal adventure where nothing weird goes on. Why were you asking?
Yes, I do remember this. Oh, that's so funny.
But with Keith Capel and Sam Stewart, you've certainly not put any pressure on yourself.
Oh yeah, I didn't, like this is Genesys is quite similar to Star Wars. It does a lot of tweaks that improve the game, I think, which Sam was very nice to point out, as well as that nastier crit table, which I quite like a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just literally running it that way, I had like Star Wars adversary cards at the time because like Genesys just basically come out recently, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh well, I need some Nazi guards. Well, I guess stormtroopers will do, right? Of some sort, right?
Quite fitting, actually.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, from concept to final product, how long did it take you to come up with? How long did it all take to come together? And what were some of the challenges that you found associating, getting it from that first initial idea that you and Will put together through to the final product that we see on the Foundry?
Yeah, so I'll skip the giant time skip where I hadn't even thought about it until the game of the call, and just say that, well, actually, when I started to take care of this, because obviously we had a D-30 check-in for this to make sure it was ready to launch right at that in-flight report. At the same time, I was wrapping up my master's coursework and submitting to academic journals and like that kind of stuff. So it was pretty compressed. We'll say like maybe a couple months of, and really only to the end where I really gave it a ton of effort. So really, I'm kind of jealous of Keith's, Spartan lifestyle where he can give his full effort to this, but definitely more like a lot of the other freelancers and indeed fans who'll be rolling content on top of their normal job. But yeah, so a couple months, and in terms of struggles, what I ended up having to do, because I meant to reach out to somebody and say, hey, could you just do the InDesign for me? Because I got no clue how to do it. And because I was so compressed and wanted to get it done in time, I ended up having to self-teach myself InDesign and lay it out to fit that D-30. That was my real, like, I'm going to do this, right?
Yeah.
As well as fitting in, like, a final playtest as well. So trying to make sure that all fit in there. And another aspect, which I'll throw out there too, is that I had a good opportunity to rope in another friend of mine, Brett Bambridge, to give me a bit of a historical review. He's a historian by his undergrad education who really is quite into World War II gaming, and his area of study is kind of like fascism in the 1930s. So definitely someone who I could say, hey, like, does this at least pass the World War II movie logic smell test of like realism in that regard? So that was another aspect that was quite interesting.
There you go. Teaching history as well as role-playing. That's great. Very, very cool.
Yeah, just a quick note, when you get to about like scene 3, that's where the historical part kind of stops. So don't base your grade 10 history exam off of what's in this module, please.
Yeah. As far as we know.
This is true. This is true.
We know. Who's to say?
Who's to say, right? Yeah.
I'm just Nazis and weird war. It's there for a reason. So okay, you talk about running this. So last episode, in episode 3, we had a very huge discussion with Alexis Dykema about playtesting. What was the biggest learning experience for you, since we're coming off of that, it's still fresh in my mind, to come out of playtesting for this module, this adventure?
Well, just that it's so critical to do. I certainly made a major point. Like I said, I was kind of down to the wire to get this thing together. But I made a point, no, I will do a final playtest on this to make sure it's good to go here. Because guys like Studio 404, I'm kind of at the same time like both jealous, but also it's cool to be like a solo operator who do this kind of a one-man show here. I find my own art. I do my own writing. I will outsource some proofreading, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But being able to get that playtest to make sure some stuff is in here. Something even as minor as only 6 pre-gens. One thing that stuck out to me is that I had one of my players was playing one of the pre-gens, and this guy's by a mechanical reading, a really good character. The player had an opportunity to do lots of good stuff. It's the French Scout character. A lot of good stuff in almost every scene. But the thing is, it's kind of almost like a jack-of-all-trades generalist, so not super interesting. So that was like the player's feedback. I'm like, oh, well, I don't want to really change the balance of these characters, but maybe what can I do? Even something as simple as saying, oh, well, let's give you some smoke grenades, or let's give you some of this stuff, right? Let's give you a bayonet to try and to pump it up a bit there more, to make sure that everyone, has all those pre-gens have something to offer, and there's something unique about them. So something that I thought the character was quite good, and it was from a pure mechanical impact on the game, but was missing 1 or 2 tricks to make it a really fun character. So I would have completely missed that, for example.
There you go. So
interesting.
You mentioned proofreading there. Is there a challenge that you experience with proofreading?
Yeah, so as a solo person, and this is the same with my academic side here as well, and I'm sure you two, being a Foundry author as well, will know this, is that at some point you become so close to your own words that you've written, you revise them and that kind of stuff, and even if you back away for a couple of days, that helps. But there's nothing quite like another set of eyes on your content, and ideally from someone who's in a similar kind of level to you, to give you some good cleanup, and if you have the time, some good feedback to improve the writing you've done. So that's indispensable as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could not agree more.
Now, you've started to dabble in other areas in the Foundry with the first TV series in Crooks and Contacts for Android. You've also done the sort of the expansion product for Power of the Vril as well. So do you have any suggestions for anyone writing for the Foundry, and what sort of content that because you've obviously done a little bit of research as to, what people are wanting to see. So what would you sort of give people as a suggestion to start to look at maybe?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I think we're still really early days. There's some amazing stuff on the Foundry right now, stuff that I've, of course, purchased myself, and I'm happy to be a customer for. It's all really good, right? But I really think that the lion's share of players are still to come and discover the Foundry. And as much as I love, there was actually a Facebook question someone asked in the Genesys group, what's your favorite content? Don't say your own. And someone had to put a gun to my head to pick between some of this really good stuff. But I honestly believe the best product is yet to come. So I would actually say people should, look at that. But I think that they shouldn't be afraid to follow what they're interested in, right? So I like, again, like I said, that kind of shift from normal war to weird. And I also I love Android. We didn't mention at the start, but Android probably out of the two settings that are out right now is my personal favorite. So that's what attracted me. And yeah, do I try and offer a product that is jam-packed full of extra stuff, so it's value add to the customer? Absolutely. But my primary focus is making sure that I'm doing that while also doing something that I personally enjoy, because I think that reflects in the writing. So you should definitely try and find a niche for your product, but at the same time make sure that overlaps with something you're legitimately excited to do, because otherwise you're going to get to the hard part where you've got to slog out and finish this product, and you're just not going to do it if you don't like it.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And we've had other people and guests on the show talk before about how important it is to do something you're genuinely passionate about, because it'll get done.
Exactly. That's the real trick, right? I think how many things are, you look at some of the forums and there's some phenomenal work there, and it's in like beta, 4 years in, and this thing is a flawless product that if they just kind of maybe did a proofread pass, a layout, put some art in, put it out, you'd never know it wasn't from a professional company. But it's to actually finish is something. It's almost like art is never finished; it's only ever abandoned. But you need to kind of have that art form of knowing when we've done enough with this, it's time to move on. But I will say, attached to that too is at least something that I've done, which I've really enjoyed, is not being afraid to experiment. Like I said, I'm like a solo operator here. So like I said before, I taught myself how to use InDesign, and the template provided is amazing. And guys like Scott Zumwalt provide a lot of good advice. But also I started to look at Photoshop. How could I, in say Armor and the Vril, I've got a lot of open source or photos from the German Bundes archive of all those tanks and stuff that I include in that product. And how can I maybe take that photo in that's kind of up there in a Creative Commons license, know how to use a Creative Commons license, and then also clean it up with some Photoshop to kind of crisp the image up to make it look quite nice in the layout. That's something that walking into this I had zero knowledge of. But a spirit of experimentation and a talent for Googling can take you pretty far, I think.
That is so true. Absolutely. All right, so could you give us a glimpse of something exciting or unique which is actually in Power of the Vril?
Yeah, well, like I said, some of my influences were some more of those action horror RPGs like Dark Heresy and that kind of stuff. And I think what this adventure does is it gives you a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different kind of gameplay, where you have lots of serious World War II action movie combat, but then you have opportunities to explore, but then you have opportunities to parachute behind enemy lines, but then you have opportunities to explore ancient ruins. You're able to do so many different things in this adventure. That's basically like it's like your beginner pulp adventure that I think has room on hopefully everyone's digital bookshelf here. Just to throw it out there, my second playtest group did something you guys didn't think to do, which was, let's just say, parachute indoors. Honestly, indoors, but not outside. Let's put it that way.
Right. Okay.
I think we know what I'm talking about.
I guess that could work.
There are a few little issues with it, but hey, look, sure, I guess.
Remember, it's the yes-and system, so yes.
Yes, and. Indeed.
Please roll despair. Please roll despair. Please roll with despair.
I was hoping for it. Didn't come, so they're lucky this time.
Very good.
Awesome. So, okay, you have prolifically released. So, following up with Power of the Vril, you came out with sort of an equipment and tanks guide, Armor of the Vril. Supplement straight after that. We also talked about you've got another first in a quick series of ready-made NPCs to go. Can you tell us what's next for you in the Foundry? What are you working on? What is burning a hole in your keyboard right now? And what can we see next from Chris Hunt on the Foundry?
Sure. Well, I can talk more concretely about Crooks and Contacts, and then I'll maybe leave a little something I've kind of shared with the two of you on a person-to-person basis. But first of all, Crooks and Contacts, so I could say that's a deluxe NPC profile that's fully fleshed out. It kind of really builds on almost how as an adversaries format, but double length. And it gets you what you need in terms of the personality analysis of the NPCs, adventure keys to game your game. And I really like the favor system of Android, Shadow of the Beanstalk. I keep saying Shadows of the Beanstalk because I'm an old school Shadows of the Empire fan, but it's Shadow of the Beanstalk. But yeah, so it gives you these sample favors where you get the character and you're like, well, okay, great. Yeah, so you phone this guy up, Marcus Wyndham's a runner, and sure, he'll run a network for you and get you some details, but he's going to want something in return, my friend. So what I want to do with that is that Crooks and Contacts 1, what that means? There's a Crooks and Contacts 2 coming out.
Right.
So what I want to do is roll these out, and rather than wait necessarily to do a big compilation, is get them out so you can get the one you want. So maybe you don't really want a runner NPC because you got a PC runner. You don't want to steal their shadow. So, but maybe you want Crooks and Contacts 2 and 3 or 2 and 5 when that eventually comes out. So that's my short-term plan, is to kind of keep working on that and then get some feedback in and see what people are interested in and go from there. And it's been quite good so far. So kind of a way to get out a couple thematically related things in a small package that you're not really breaking the bank at getting. So that's the short term. And a long term, I look at something like Starcana, I say, interesting. Maybe I could do something similar to this. And that's a ways off, especially as a one-off person here, as a solo person. Although I know Guillaume soloed Inquisition, so I guess that's maybe my bar to reach. But yeah, I really like
high bar, man. It's
some good stuff. I just got his adventure right now, which he recently launched. And I haven't read all the way through, but it looks real good too. Dying Light, I think it's called. But yeah, so something like that. And for me, I'm a big fan of a PC game called XCOM 2, where you're fighting against an alien occupation. And I also love like some of those old shows, like from the 90s and 80s, Earth Final Conflict and V. With the visitors, right? So I think that would be a cool little setting, and maybe a way to extend the sci-fi, from Android to include some more alien stuff. So that's kind of on my radar, something along those lines. But yeah. And of course, F5ing FFG's website, waiting for my first FFG product to be announced.
Well, we can't wait for it to be announced. So you are a busy fellow, sir, obviously. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to come here and talk with us, to share with us more about the power of the Vril. And for those of you listening, if you haven't had a chance to check this out, I truly do have to echo the earlier sentiment. I think Weird War is one of the most underappreciated settings that's available in Genesys. Not a lot of people are doing anything with it, and that's an absolute shame because it is thematically amazing, wonderfully hilarious, and you get to shoot Nazis.
Indeed.
So if you want to dip your toe into the pool for Weird War, I can't think of a better place to start than with Power of the Vril. It's a fantastic module, Chris, and you've done a wonderful job with it. So thank you for it. And thank you for coming on and talking to us about it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Hey, thanks, guys. That means a lot that you guys enjoyed it, and it was an absolute pleasure and honor to be invited on the cast. Love to do it again.
We'd love to have you. I mean, the more product you do, the more opportunities you have to come on the show and talk about it. So we'd love to have you on board.
Better hit that keyboard then.
Very good.
Hit that keyboard, buddy. Hey. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
So I absolutely love the Power of the Vril. I loved play testing that. When it first was at Gamination Con, and I think it had a lot to do with the people I was playing with, like Sam and Keith, but very well put together. Very well put together. Given the time frame that it was put together on, Chris did an absolutely fantastic job. And as soon as he said that this was the product that he was going to be putting out there for the Foundry, I was excited because I knew that other people would be excited by it. And as you mentioned earlier, the fact that it's not getting a lot of like the Weird War setting that we see in the core rulebook, that it's not getting as much love perhaps as it should. Definitely. If you haven't done something like that on your table, go and do that now, or develop something for Foundry. Absolutely, do it.
Do it. Do it. Yes, good combo. But all right, man. Do we have some listener questions we should answer?
We do. We have a couple of questions, and I know we've been running a long time for this episode, so thanks very much for bearing with us. But we do. We have two questions that need answering in our section called Under the Hammer.
Under the Hammer.
And welcome to Under the Hammer, the segment where we will answer your games and rules questions about the Genesys RPG as it impacts both rules and content creation, and of course play. Now, this episode, we've got a couple of interesting questions from our wonderful listeners, so keep those questions coming in. So, Chris, would you like to take us through the first question?
Yeah, this one actually came in via YouTube.
I know.
YouTube comment from Alex Pepper, who said, referring to your third episode where you refer to creating knowledge skills, could you combine a knowledge skill with a martial skill? For example, light weapons, or I'm assuming he's mean like light melee, light range. Since your character spends a lot of time with these weapons to practice repairing and maintaining, could it be possible that they get an understanding of the history of these weapons through hands-on experience? I'm thinking of a Wild West setting, cutting out the need for knowledge firearms. I
thought that question was brilliant.
It really is a fantastic question.
And it's something that sort of we've touched base on earlier in this episode as well when we start talking about decoupling skills from attributes. Sometimes it's a really good thing to do. More so, I think, in just from the amount of gameplay that I've done, more so when it's a detriment to like if a PC says, I want to, use, in this case, I want to use a ranged light to work out which is the best weapon to purchase. So, in that sort of case, what you would look at perhaps is going, okay, so you're a martial type character. Chances are that you don't necessarily have high intellect. So maybe that it's based off intellect and the PC will go, maybe I should not do that. But if it suits the scenario, definitely should. But there may be a talent that you might want to develop that does exactly that does it permanently, that allows you to make a knowledge check when, deciding on what sort of, or identifying weaponry, that sort of thing, that you would, you could use the ranks that you have in a particular weapon class. So yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea, and I know that I've done this myself with certain certain equipment. For example, I've people have wanted to use it for exactly this. In actual fact, when we were talking about weapons, that they wanted, I think it was a Star Wars game where they were trying to work out which was the best buy in these weapons, because the manufacturers or the people who were selling them were selling really dodgy weaponry, and so they wanted to know, if there was any differences between the model that they'd had, like the prototype original, and this mock copy. What was the difference between the two? And you could say that there was perception or whatever else, but one of the characters, who was an intellect based, wanted to use not mechanics, because they didn't have any, but they had in ranks in ranged heavy. So I've allowed them to decouple to do that, and it worked really, really well.
And I think there's two ways to handle this. You can either go raw, rules as written, or you can do a bit of a house rule, which is honestly what Huli's suggesting, and it's a good one. Jay Little, who is the creator of the narrative dice system, he actually created the mechanics for it originally many years ago for Star Wars, has been on the Order 66 podcast with me several times. And one of the things he mentioned early on is this. And if he were here right now, he would tell you that's how you should deal with it. Yep. Have him make a range light skill check, but they use intellect instead of agility. If you're a raw guy and you really don't like that, you want to kind of use the knowledge skill breakdown kind of as we did it. Because when we had our discussion, we were focused very much on the rules as written, right? And the raw, and really the nuts and bolts of his skill. First and foremost, so he wants to cut out the need for knowledge firearms. Can you compress that into a different skill? I mean, knowledge science?
Yes.
Okay. That would be my first suggestion. My second is, there is a bit, and this is the second thing. How often are they going to need the skill?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the other thing. If you honestly see them needing to know the knowledge of firearms, maybe like if that's going to happen once every third session or something like that, then just let them roll range light. That's fine. It's not going to be that big of a deal. If it's going to happen more frequently than that, I would caution against it, just because at that point you're looking at characters who are clearly not designed for intellectual knowledge using it. And we talked about the difference in doing versus knowing. Yep. Okay. Yep. Now, if you don't have a decent knowledge skill that you can roll knowledge firearms into, and you feel like it's a check they're going to make a lot, so you don't want them to use range light to do it, another suggestion I can highly recommend is rolling it into mechanics. Not only is it an intellect-based skill, which from a balance standpoint is going to be the same thing as if you were rolling a knowledge check, but that's a more sensible roll-up, okay? If you're talking about the understanding of the history of these weapons, and how they work, mechanics could certainly go into it. But at the same time, if you're like the history of these weapons, you should honestly have a knowledge skill like a lore or something that covers history. Absolutely. And that would probably cover these weapons as well.
That's right. But again, ultimately, I think it's going to be dependent on your table, as long as you're not abusing these sorts of things. And if you've got a player who's for whatever reason during the session, they felt that they weren't involved at all, and then suddenly this comes up, and they just go, yeah, look, I could use this. And they get enthusiastic and they explain why they've done certain things or why they want to take that course of action, and they're really motivated. Let them do it. You can always increase the difficulty if you want to use it that way. On the fly, give them some setback. There are mechanics which are in the game that allow you to do that. But don't discourage it. It goes back to what you said right at the start of the episode, Chris, which that really is a case of that it's a yes and or no but system. It's if you want to do something, absolutely you can do it, but there's going to be a cost, or it's going to be a little bit higher difficulty, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Good suggestion. So hopefully, Alex, that helped out.
Absolutely.
Do we have another? We have another question.
We do. We have a question via Facebook from Jeffrey Jones. This was a little bit different. I actually came across this in a different area altogether, but I've engaged Jeffrey in this. So it's come up as ambushes, which is always a fan favorite. If I understand it correctly, in an ambush, only ambushes roll cool, and the ambushed roll vigilance. To me, it seems to make a well-thought-out ambush kind of lame, especially if the character's cool isn't so cool. Now, Jeff did give an explanation of how he would do that, which is a little long-winded. Given our time frame, we're going to sort of, move away from that. But in essence, he wanted to know how we would do an ambush using the Genesys rules.
Okay. First of all, not liking the ambush rules because your players chose not to put points in cool. Screw that. Okay. Oh, too bad. So sad. That would be the same thing as saying, I really wish that we didn't get surprised into combat so much because I didn't put any points into vigilance. No, it doesn't work. I can't believe we have to fix this machine. I didn't put any points in mechanics. That's not an excuse. No, all right. No. If your players want to ambush somebody successfully, put points in cool. That's what the skill's there for. You don't use it for anything else, so use it for that. Okay.
All right.
Now
that you've got that out of your system.
Now that I've got that out of my system, forgive me if I'm misapplying this. In a nutshell, whether you realize it or not, man, this is a holdover mentality from D&D. Because in D&D, if you got a surprise on somebody, you got to the encounter started and everybody rolled initiative, and then you got to get a free round of action before anybody else did, right? Yep. So in essence, the way I run ambushes is it's not based on cool or vigilance, not for the ambush part. That is honestly, whether you're successful in an ambush has everything to do with stealth versus perception in most cases. All right. Now, if you have successfully surprised the foe, the way I do it is I actually give the party free actions immediately. Everybody gets a free action right now. That is your surprise. Everyone gets a free action. You want to attack? You want to move? You want to downgrade to a maneuver and move into a better position or rush into the fray? Everybody gets a free action who is part of the ambushing party. If you're successful with that stealth, that is how I run ambush. Then, boom, roll initiatives. And oh yeah, the ambushers, you got to roll cool. All right. You still get your free action. Maybe if you all suck at cool, you're now low on the totem pole when it comes to the actual initiative in combat, but you've already gotten a free ambush round of action. Okay. You guys roll cool. They roll vigilance because they were surprised, and that's how it's determined. That's how I do it. And that has worked for me for years from Star Wars on. And so that's my rant. Hooli?
What's interesting is I do it a little bit differently. And that's the magic of this system. There is no right or wrong answer at all when it comes to how you apply these things. There's certain mechanics that obviously are a staple that you must obey. But generally speaking, if you want to handle things differently, handle them differently. One of the things that obviously that your check that you do an ambush with is either going to be your vigilance and your cool. They're still skill checks, and they're still simple skill checks. If the characters have set up their ambush and they've spent a lot of time and they've invested narrative energy into it, there is nothing wrong with making it opposed. So if you wanted to have the leader of the team who's setting up the ambush, whoever it is that's got the highest in the relative ability and skill, that then becomes the difficulty that the ambushees have to roll against when it comes to their initiative. So
that's a really good suggestion, Hooli.
I'm a big believer in that you try to, and this is actually something that I learned from Order 66, is that you want to try to reduce the number of dice rolls that you make in a turn. So rather than having perception rolls and vigilance, and then all of a sudden you've got to go into, vigilance and cool, bring it all in together and under the one banner. And so do it that way. And then when they're setting up their ambush, they might be going, okay, there might be a skill challenge involved beforehand. And so they might have some excess boost die, or they may have made an obvious mistake with either the spares or threat. And so that then turns into setback die or something like that. Or the reverse, if you're talking about the people that they're trying to ambush, that they've left some evidence behind, which is clearly that people have been here, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I would be suggesting as far as how you would do an ambush.
Excellent suggestion. Absolutely excellent suggestion. If you really want to minimize the dice rolls. Obviously both of these suggestions are modifications to the core rules. Whatever really works well for you. But I guess my primary point is, don't change the rules just because your players stink in certain skills. That's their decision. All right. And Hooli, if I had to summarize maybe a key point and takeaway from you is minimize the dice rolls, and whenever possible. And honestly, I think that's a fantastic suggestion. Because at that point, if you apply difficulty to the ambushed party, they are, even with your players low cool, they are still very likely to be higher in the initiative order at that point. So that's a really interesting suggestion. Very, very good. Very good.
Awesome. And just
excellent.
Just on that as well, very quickly, is that if you're worried then about the ambushers getting the jump on it, sitting in the middle of a rainforest with mosquitoes and whatever else biting, there's going to be a lot of environmental factors. So just sitting there for that long, depending on how long it is, and you might be saying to your PCs, how long are you staying in ambush for? They might be waiting hours, days, who knows? sitting in the one spot after you've set all that up, we're trying to deal with rations and whatever else, you might end up being 3 difficulty, as well as some setback die because it's the humidity is so huge, that sort of stuff. There's nothing wrong, and there's nothing in the rules that says that you can't apply difficulty to initiative checks. Anyway, so there you go. Well, that brings us to the end of a great show. Somewhat long, but great. And
we keep getting talks like people are like, man, I can't believe these shows are so long. It's like, but we don't spend an hour and a half bantering here. I mean, guys, we're plowing through as much content as we can, and we really are eager to get this stuff out. And the overwhelming feedback for that seems to be positive. Yeah. So hopefully you guys are enjoying.
Absolutely. And if you've got any other questions that you'd like us to answer about developing your own content for the Genesis, for Genesis RPG, being a GM or a player, or just general questions about the rules themselves, even about, adventure design and things like that, you can send us an email to forgegenesis@d20radio.com, or you can post your questions to either Facebook or Twitter by searching Forge Genesis. And of course, if you're lucky, you might get your question answered here on the show. Also, to be sure, make sure that you, take a look at the greater discussion that's going on at the D20 Radio Facebook group, where we nerds congregate to cross-pollinate.
And, of course, don't forget to give us a like. Reviews are also very important, so drop us one on your podcatcher, iTunes, and, of course, Facebook. And as we said before, you can also visit us on our website at forgegenesis.com. And you can also find us on YouTube by searching at Forge Genesis.
Indeed. I was so happy when we got a question from YouTube. Because with YouTube, there is a huge name that you've got to put in when you're sending a link to people. And you only need 100 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed to YouTube yet, even if you don't use it, pop on a subscribe, get us up to 100 so that we can just refer to us as Forge Genesis. That'd be great.
We can get a short link. It's so much nicer. Yes, I know.
And also to be sure to tune into our next episode, where our topic for the furnace is going to be one of more confounding and exciting things for RPG creation. And that is adventure seeds and set pieces.
That's right. Module creation, full adventure creation is a lot more common, but some of the most useful content created for GM-ready supplements and some of the handiest content that a home GM can have created for themselves, ready to go in their GM book, are pre-made, pre-written, well-designed seeds and set pieces for player encounters. So join us for that amazing discussion next time.
Indeed. And we also have, I'm quite excited because just the amount of work that he does for the community. We have a special guest for our Breaking the Mold segment next time. So I've got a whole heap of questions for him. So, looking forward to that. And he has written his own module as well that's available on the Foundry. So looking forward to that. Indeed. Well, that's a wrap for us. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you can join us next time as we continue to explore the Genesis role-playing game. I'm GM Hooley. May your triumphs be many and your despairs be few.
And I'm GM Chris, wishing you peace, love, and good gaming.
And remember, the Forge Podcast, helping you hone your gaming edge. The Forge, a Genesis podcast, is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Forge is a fan-generated podcast. All the information provided on the podcast, social media, and related website is not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Forge, a Genesis RPG podcast, and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, Genesis logo, Genesis Foundry, content, and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games. All products available on the Genesis Foundry website remain the property of their respective companies and individuals. For more information about the Forge, a Genesis RPG podcast, visit www.forgegenesis.com.